This story begins with the fact that the girl fell in the snow somewhere far in the snowy mountains. Her body was covered with abrasions. She met the long-awaited death because there was no reason to live with her. She had neither a family nor friends, nobody at all. Now she was going to cut off her worthless life in this way. The girl covered her eyes and thought, to die from frostbite is not so bad. The incredible landscape of the snowy mountains was the last that her eyes saw. After some time, a man in a black fur coat appeared on the horizon. He looked at everything that was happening and said, "Incredible! And even on the deathbed, this woman lies as if all the snowy field belongs to her." He stood a little more looking at the entire unfolding picture, and then said, "You do not change yourself, the Empress." Then the man sat down on one knee and said, "If you decide to say goodbye to life so easily." But as soon as the man began to speak, the girl opened her eyes weakly and seemed to recognize him. Then he grabbed the girl in his arms and added, "I will gladly take you myself." The dark-haired man looked at her with a strange expression on his face and said, "Now you belong to me." And at that moment, the girl's consciousness turned off. Scraps of memories of 3 months ago surfaced in her head. Exactly 3 months ago, in the Thanatos Palace, someone gave an instruction to a fair-haired man. "Time has come. Kill the Empress." The girl in a red sleeping suit approached him from behind and continued, "Use Natasha, Your Majesty." And then her voice became a little quieter, and she added, "Get rid of the Empress and strengthen your position." The white-haired man clenched his teeth and looked forward with a crazy look. Now he was more like an evil dog. Ice and gold empires, Thanatos, everything on this earth was supposed to belong to the Emperor. But this is only formally. In fact, the Emperor could not do anything without the permission of the Empress. While the man was considering all this, the girl in red continued, "Leave the Empress's brother at me." In the head of this girl, there was already an exact plan about how to overthrow the Empress. The Empress's brother was to become a scoundrel. The next step in her plan, the Empress's brother in the future was to become a man who raped the Emperor's mistress. When the girl spoke, the expression of the Emperor's face became strange. Then the Empress will give up all her strength to save her brother. But the more she will try, the more it will look as if it is burned out. The Emperor's mistress clung to him and continued to certify the young man that everything would be fine. This plan was thought out to the smallest details. In the brother's room, evidence should have been found. Everyone will say that these are all the Empress's tricks because of the hatred of the Emperor and Natasha. The girl walked around the young man and wrapping her hands on his face with her hands. "However, before that, you must do something." After these words, she jerked him onto the bed, thus gaining a dominant position. While the Emperor was shocked by what was happening, she continued, "Empress's hands. They need to be tied. Deprive her of everything. Contacted, relatives, all who she values. It was necessary to get rid of everyone. But even after this, the whole plan has not yet come to an end. At the reception, she will face with His Majesty. Then the second phase was supposed to come. Then, before everyone at the reception, I will tell everyone that I wear under the heart of the child of His Majesty." This was to be the final act of this production, in which the Empress played such a terrible role. This will be her last way out. Thanks to the brother of the beast and jealousy, she will appear to be a terrible woman attempting to the family. The eyes of the Emperor's mistress shone with madness. "How wonderful, do not find." Close and family probably had to try to protect the poor Empress, and, following the plan, it was at that moment that it was necessary to expose the sword and sprinkle the earth with blood. Thus, according to the plan of Natasha, the Empress will not have a single chance to survive in such a situation. The girl smiled. This smile betrayed her even more distraught look. Then she decided to give orders. Then smear everything in the blood. No matter how smart the Empress is, the death of all loved ones will break her. When the plan was already at the final stage, the girl in white robes walked along a long corridor, accompanied by a maid. This was the very 17th Empress Thanatos, from the Empire of Ice and Gold. She walked all the time with a cane since she limped on her leg. The girl squeezed the cane stronger with every step. Rosalyn v. Sunset was popularly considered the most beautiful, a noble and perfect ruler in history. She was an outstanding politician, an excellent diplomat who speaks 6 languages. This girl helped the poor by creating a medical institution. The people also called her an empress with a big heart. No one ever spoke evil about her. Therefore, even because of such a shortage, it never occurred to anyone to poke a finger at her. Ice Rosalyn was loved by everyone. Only the view of this woman expressed greatness. But the chip was that everyone loved Rosalyn. All except the emperor, who part-time was her husband. Many years have passed since they became a couple. Although this was only a performance for everyone. How he dared to get rid of all my people. Even my brother was imprisoned in prison. Guilloty, a fool, blinded by envy. The girl walked along the corridor and thought, while I have someone to protect, I have to hold on. The maid that followed her expressed dumb sympathy for the girl and what she had to face. The girl mentally returned at the time when the empress's leg was badly damaged through the fault of the emperor. Then she came to her chambers and asked Rosalyn about well-being. And the empress answered with a smile. Nothing. I will live. This answer for a long time was printed in the maid's memory. Now she remembered this, squeezing her fingers. She followed this majestic individual now thought. Your honesty will destroy you. A simple melody echoed in the corridor. The notes were beaten off, from concrete walls. This further emphasized the desertedness of this place, and the loneliness that the empress ended. The maid sharply called out Rosalyn. She turned her head and looked at the girl questioningly. After that, the maid's face became strange, because she could no longer keep this expression of pity in herself. The empress decided to defuse the situation. Everything is fine. Can't you open the door? Suddenly, the maid sharply gathered her strength and announced loudly, I will be on your side, your majesty. Rosalyn looked at the maid and how much she believed in her strength, and then called her by name. Then the empress hid her head, and her lips broke into a barely visible smile. A series of diseases and coincidences deprived me of close friends. Lady Charlotte, a beautiful maid, or my faithful supporter as the Minister of Internal Affairs, a man who was always serious, and even the captain of the nightly detachment that was correctly defending me. A brave white-haired man. Their death was exactly the work of the emperor. It was pointless to doubt it. Anna, this very maid, was the last person left with Rosalyn. The girl did not want to lose her. The empress said, Anna, no matter what happens, immediately leave as far as possible from here. Just in case, I prepared you things. Anna came into a numb, and her voice fell into a cry. Your Majesty, don't say that! The maid squeezed the hem of her dress, trying to hide her emotions. Her voice trembled. And how am I? Then the girl bowed her head and said quietly, How can I leave you, Rosie? The empress smiled. Rosie! How long I have not heard this name. Wait only a few days. Count Sorrento collects strength. As for the city of Sunset. But Rosalyn did not let the girl finish. She smiled, as if saying goodbye, and said, Open the door? Anna came into even greater bewilderment. On her face, rather obvious signs of experience were displayed. The girl clenched her teeth and realized that she could not disobey the order of her mistress. Therefore, she slowly moved to the door. The door swung open and someone announced, Her Majesty Empress arrived. The measured knock of heels was heard in a huge ballroom. The Empress came. The girl slowly walked along the lifting hall, and from time to time caught her eyes. The knock of her heels as well as the sound of the cane of the carpet was accompanied by Rosalyn. The emperor was sitting on the elevated throne alone. Rosalyn approached him right. The man looked at her from top to bottom and thought. Nevertheless, she hung up on her feet. Disgusting woman! Approaching the emperor, the girl pierced him with a cold look that he had made his way to the bones. The man was a little scared of such a turn that it was noticeably affecting the expression of his face. After a little pause, he nevertheless turned to her. Why did you come to a banquet with a sore foot? Rosalyn looked at him and then said, Even if I limp, I continue to adamantly follow my path. The man stared at her with even greater contempt and anger. He thought, Witch! Somewhere in the distance stood a young man, on whose lips a suspicious smile broke out as soon as he saw the empress. It was the Krasis Minister of Foreign Affairs, Amora. Next to him, I surprised the empress's arrival. The table looked towards the girl and stated once, and the truth appeared. The empress continued to bend her line. Even stumbling, I go in the right direction. The man, who was sitting on the throne, was surprised that the girl could say this and clenched her teeth. At this time, Rosalyn's head was spinning only the idea that if he died, then won. She did not want to sacrifice anyone else. For the sake of protecting the father and mother and treasures transmitted from generation to generation. Suddenly, from somewhere from the depths of the hall, steps were heard. The hem of the red dress, arriving, dragged on the floor. The girl closed her face with a red fan. Her outfit looked defiant. She greeted the Empress. Rosalyn turned sharply, hearing a familiar voice. She thought, Natasha Rowanti. She knew for sure that this technique, only for the delegation of 7 countries, and no one except the government, could be present here. Therefore, the girl came in bewilderment, seeing Natasha here. Why did you come? Natasha covered her face with a fan and pretended to be very sorry. I'm to blame. I should not say that I wear the Emperor's child. Then your brother would not harm me. As soon as Natasha was told, a hype immediately rose in the hall. No looked glanced at and whispered. All at once came into general bewilderment. Have you heard? A child from the Emperor? Madame Natasha? No one was at all embarrassed by the inappropriateness of everything that was happening. Only the Empress understood what everything leads to. Natasha continued to break the comedy. She approached Rosalyn and said plaintively, It's my fault. Then the girl took the Empress by the hand and said, Therefore, please. On Natasha's lips, an ominous grin froze when she approached the Empress and began to whisper, Please. But the Empress reacted faster. At the moment, she did not care about the child. This shameless person was just born. After a couple of moments, Natasha fell to the floor as a result of the impact of the Empress. Rosalyn held a knife in her hands. Drops of scarlet blood flowed down from the knife, and Natasha had a bleeding wound on Natasha on his stomach. The girl continued to lie on the floor and bleed while the hype was rising. People in the hall were divided into 2 camps. One called the Empress, and the second to Natasha. Someone desperately shouted that Natasha needed the help of the doctor, and someone still did not realize what was happening. The foreign minister looked at this picture in bewilderment. Someone continued to scream, Spin the lady to a safe place. And the emperor at that time rejoiced sitting on the throne. A smile blossomed on his face, which did not fit into what was happening at all. Having hesitated a little, he gave his face a more worried look and shouted, The guard that you are waiting. The emperor ordered the guard immediately to take away a weapon from Rosalyn. The girl stood in the spot. Drops of blood still drained from the knife in her hands, and she could not move. It was the end. She looked at Natasha lying at her feet and realized that her blow was not fatal. The emperor wished Rosalyn a happy journey. After some time, someone finally went in the banquet hall. Natasha was taken to the doctor. The Minister of Foreign Affairs still looked at the scene of the attempt with bewilderment. The emperor was still sitting on the throne. This man looked crazy. He shouted, The banquet is cancelled, the minister thought. It destroys the future of Thanatos with his own hands, a miserable person who does not know what treasure he has. So the empress became a criminal in his country, which has served as loyalty and love all her life. When the foreign minister ended for a long time, he looked at the wall for a long time and could not understand what had just happened before his eyes. The person who accompanied the minister in the banquet spoke. Probably Empress E will survive this winter and die. A picture of a woman who was imprisoned was immediately loomed in her head. Before the overthrow of the Empress, His Majesty tormented her until she says the whereabouts of the family's treasure, and let her tormented hellish pain, Rosalyn, who knew the goal of the Emperor, held on. On the day after day, she was tortured by beating with a whip until a couple of hundred wounds remained on her back. This girl kept without making a single sound, even despite pain and fear. Meanwhile, outside the castle, people came to save her. The people began to rebel. Ordinary people for whom she did so much went out into the streets in order to ask not to kill Rosalyn. They all unanimously said that this was their only request. Only once show mercy. Sometimes the emperor went to the terrace. Then they turned directly to him, holding out his hands to him. The man clenched his teeth again. I thought they fell silent after a few days, but the end of the end was not visible. If she dies from my hand, this will certainly cause indignation in people, so— And while the emperor came up with a new plan, the empress continued to spend her days in imprisonment. This girl was no longer like that magnificent woman. Now she was all in scratches and abrasions. Once, one of her tormentors came to her again and in order to bring her to her feelings, poured a bucket of water into the girl. Drops of cold water flowed through her hair and fell into the eyes, but the girl's hands were tied to chains. Today, the emperor himself stood in front of her. Since she saw him for the last time, he has become even more terrible. The only expression on his face already caused her an attack of nausea. In the end, I could not learn anything from you. You are really the Empress of the Ice Kingdom. Even after so many torture, the location of the treasures did not say. I wanted to take you to pieces and kill you, but… The man's speech was interrupted by the exclamations of protesters. He stated, "As you can see, it is very noisy outside. And the truth, if people were rebelling." The man grinned again to feel his superiority. "I will have mercy on you, so be grateful." The girl did not even deign to raise her eyes on this vile type. A few minutes later, there was a ringing of chains, accompanied by the vile voice of the emperor. The empress weaned from the chains. "Hey you! Throw this woman into the ice mountains of Krolturia." The girl was no longer able to express any emotions. She is too tired of everything. But when the girl had already reconciled with everything, the emperor said in a chant, "I have a gift." After that, 2 guards threw 2 heads on the floor in front of the empress. It was a terrible sight in itself, but the girl came into numbness only because she knew these people. The people who belonged to these heads were those who raised it. Her father and mother. She screamed curses to the emperor, but as soon as she opened her mouth, 2 guards knocked on the ground. When the girl had not yet moved away from such a shock, they immediately began to beat her. She asked, "How could you?" But there was no answer. The emperor only mocked. "Do you know how to make such an expression on your face?" Bitter tears flowed from Rosalyn's eyes with streams. She bit her lips in a fit of anger. "I will never forgive you." At this time, the personality already familiar to us appeared on the horizon. The foreign minister arrived again. He stood on a hill and thought, "It's good that he returned." The empress was overthrown and nothing more. But this caused him anger, which he had never experienced before. The man looked at the palace with anger and thought, "What is the cause of anger? I don't know yet." But in one, he was sure for sure. Someday, he definitely had to destroy this luxurious imperial palace. The man who was walking after the minister also stopped and asked, "What are you looking at so closely?" Then this red-haired man looked around and saw a Thanatos castle in front of them. For years, the picture in his head finally fell into place. He approximately understood that he was bothering the minister. He put his palm in a white glove on the minister's fur cap, and then said, "I wonder how things are going there now." Rumor has it she was thrown into the ice mountains of Raburia, and while the red-haired man lamented about what kind of annoyance it was, the minister thought what to do. The minister stared at the imperial palace with even greater contempt in his eyes after hearing. He thought that this empress was much stronger than he could imagine. She was also much more beautiful in his eyes than everyone else he had ever met. And he also saved sadly than any other woman he had ever known. The reason for this sadness was not aware of him, but in fact, it seemed, lay on the surface. The dark-haired man abruptly pulled the reins of his horse about to quickly head somewhere. His partner was at a loss from such an impulsive act, but did not dare to ask questions. He just managed to shout to the minister in the trail, "Hey, Cayman, where are you?" But the cabin did not hear him. He carried on a horse faster than the wind and thought about something detached. The man clenched his teeth and now again looked like an evil dog that wins food. At the same time, somewhere in the middle of snow-covered void lay a girl in light white robes. Her body was made of indescribable cold, and the only thought in her head was, "Will I die like that?" She cursed the emperor on what the light stood, and also asked for forgiveness from everyone who died through her fault. The girl wanted to mourn their death, but there was no more tears. "I could not protect you. People who were nearby, all of them disappeared. I just wanted to do everything right. I wanted to become a good empress. Why did everything turn like this?" The girl was lying in the snow, unable to move even a finger. She whispered from her last strength, "Everything is fine." Suddenly, next to her was the cabin, who so abruptly went to her aid. He jumped off his horse and realized that he now has no extra time to think about the correctness of his act. His heavy boots left deep traces on the snow surface that she covered everything around. He said, "Incredibly, even on the deathbed, She will lie as if the whole snowy field belongs to her. Rosalyn's face was getting icy from the cold. It is so similar to you, the Empress. When the girl saw a familiar figure approaching her, she did not know what to think. At this time, the man gritted his teeth stronger and mentally asked himself, why was she born in Thanatos? The table looked at the girl that she was lying in the snow and was going to die so calmly without even clutching her life. Why was she supposed to be next to this dirty bastard? But now he did not have too much time to subject all doubts. The manner of the girl's cold body in a hug, and reproached himself for not finding this woman first. If you decide to say goodbye to life, I will be happy to take you with you. The man ran a finger over the lips of the Empress. They were covered with cracks and wounds from her own bites. Then the man thought that this opportunity could not introduce himself and kissed Rosalyn. Now you belong to me. Once, out of curiosity, the deity decided to create a man. Joy, sadness, anger, hope, and other emotions jumped into a pot with interest. Pretty the result of the deity wanted to show the creation to the main god. However, as soon as he was distracted for a moment, evil fell into the pot. Appearing in this way, a person from now on will always stand on the verge of good and evil. Giving in to emotions, people attacked each other and unleading wars for no reason. The first death was generated by people. The whole earth was saturated with blood. Upon learning of this, the main god was angry and tore the deity that created people into pieces. He made the deity personally deal with the rained chaos. Its parts were scattered around the world. 6 of them were placed in various objects. They were absorbed into heaven and time, into the sea and earth, and the remaining were placed in human bodies in the form of special gifts. They were divided into a gift of charm and gift of foresight, weather, death, and life. The dark-haired continued to kiss the Empress. This life could be breathed into another. He touched her frozen lips. Separating a piece from his piece, 2 raced that there was strength on a raven horse through a stormy blizzard. The guy pressed the barely breathing girl to him, adjusting the horse. Someone would say that I will hold this woman in my arms. I would not have believed in my life. However, the case has already been done. You have to survive. Necessarily. They were carried away into the distance. In a strict voice, red-haired, standing in front of a crowd of people, said, "Today we will break the camp here." The guys who stood nearby and heard the words of the girl proclaimed, "What a dubak! How does Thanatos survive?" The girl looked at them with a light grin and sentenced them to the arm. "Move there." After these words, she turned to the side, from where the crunch of snow was heard. "The table is you!" She did not have time to finish, as a man with a girl in her arms appeared before her. The red-haired began to point her finger at her and scream, "A minute that you dragged here!" Then she said in a rage, "Just don't tell me that this is a corpse." A girl with red hair looked at the snowy yurts in front. Alarming silence reigned around. She frowned and thought, "Is everything all right with his head?" The dark-haired man worriedly held a girl in his arms in tattered clothes. Then he carefully laid the girl on the bed. Her stained clothes contrasted with pallor. The cabin leaned over, silently looking at the Empress. His gaze was full of gloomy determination. The table recalled, "Empress in the center of the meeting. So, do you need an island in return for help with piracy?" Then she clarified, "Having given the island of Amaru, we will reduce the water of Thanatos by 3 kilometers." She continued, "In these waters there are zones for which we are fighting with a liger." And added, "Thought I don't know about it?" Then the man grinned and answered, "This is only 3 kilometers." Then he said, "The disputed zones are separated." The situation in the hall was tense. One of the participants suggested, "Give the island not entering the territory." A man with a slight smile added, "Goldal Island is suitable." But the Empress squinted, looking at the man. "That's what you are not." He asked with irony, "What are you talking about?" She told. "In the vicinity of this island, an amber ship sank." The woman said with a smile, "It seems that something secret is left on it." A dark-haired man said with a gloomy look, "But it's too late. Sandset family found this ship." The Empress continued, "I will return you everything that was there." Then added, "But in return." Then she smiled confidently, "You will provide a trading license for silkoprick cocoons. Happy?" The man stood by the bed, watching the girl. He thought, and so she received trade rights. He looked aside and thought, budget and meticulous. then added, "But brave and elegant." The Empress was breathing heavily on the bed and exhaled weakly. Black-haired with a tense expression on his face, looked at her. The girl repeated again. Then the darkness enveloped the consciousness of the man, and he thought, was that power not enough? Then he thought, on the diplomatic front, you were an enemy, which I wanted to destroy. The man sat, hugging the girl, clutching her to him, and said, "So why can't I see your torment?" Then they merged in a kiss, and the man still did not leave the thought. The girl opened her eyes and looked at the man. Her gaze was confused. The black-haired closed his eyes. His face became calm. The lady said, "Tamon Krasis," after which her eyes widened in surprise. She looked at him and thought, "What is this man doing?" The Empress pulled her hand with rage and sharply hit the table. The sound of a blow scattered around the room. The white-haired in stained clothes raised her hand to her face and asked, "What are you doing?" Then the dark-haired man stood with a serious look and answered, "I am flying you, so calm down." She raised her head. "Take me back to the mountains." He answered, "I would like you to survive." The woman in the blood staggered sharply and, looking at him, exclaimed. Her voice sounded shocked. After that, she was eating to pull out her hands from the grip of the table and shouted, "Do not come close. Just let me die." He looked at her with a cold and gloomy expression on his face. His eyes sparkled against the background of the shadow. The Manawan grabbed the Empress's hand, after which he said, "Even having survived this, do not care? To shame, insults, and even on the loss of a family? Unable to take revenge." The girl looked down. He raised his voice. "Do you want to be expelled from the place that you dedicated all my life? And it's a pity to finish in the ice mountains." The girl was silent. Her gaze was lowered. She only sighed quietly. Rosalyn's lips trembled, after which she said weakly, "Right." The table was silent. His face was hidden by the shadow. He did not say a word. Then the pink-haired grabbed the man's hand with whom he held her hand. "I have always been a headache for you." Then added, "Surely you dream of turning my neck?" A woman with a prayer squeezed his hand in her eyes. Her voice trembled. "Please, no more to humiliate me." The black-haired looked at her with a cold gaze, but did not answer. She stood in front of him and said desperately, "Kill me!" The man held the girl by the throat. She said, "Do not humiliate me even more. Just kill." And this woman, the overthrown empress of an enemy country, according to her, she was my headache. Then he thought, this thin neck, if I make a little effort, I can turn it easily. Eyes in which a thirst for life no longer warm. I can make them no longer open. The man suddenly froze, looking at her angrily, and thought, "But," Rosalyn recalled and thought, "So what you wanted." She remembered how he wanted to return what was on the ship, and the way she asked in return a trade license for the red cocoons of the Amur silkworm. But now she was pale and in stained clothes, clutching her hands on other people's gloves. The man removed his hands from her neck and said, "While you want to die so much, I will not allow it to happen." Rosalyn sat on the bed, and the man lowered his head. She looked exhausted and bewildered. Then the men of the man leaned toward the girl's leg and slowly kissed her, gently taking her in the palm of his hand. A woman covered with abrasions, frightened, leaned and asked, "What are you doing?" Then he bent to her leg and said calmly, "I said, I'm flying." Then added, "Do not move." The lady asked, "Stop," the cabin said. "I was your enemy, so from that moment I will do whatever I want." But the Empress said with a prayer, "I ask, enough." The black-haired man pulled away from his leg and grinned. Rosalyn tried to straighten her clothes and then awkwardly said, "This is a request, so I ask." The man answered, "Request? If you want me to stop." Anger performed on his face. "Then fight, the Empress." After these words, he pulled her closer to him, looking into his eyes. He asked, "Are you begging someone?" Then added, "Do not mix me." The table turned his head, clutching his teeth. He said, "If there is something that you want, so fight. Fight and achieve this. I, as then, are ready to be a loser as many times as I wanted." A grin appeared on the man's face. His gaze was determined. He said, "Do not tolerate, but fight." The girl with a tired expression looked at the man. The table asked, Wasn't that your lifestyle? It was a clear, frosty day. The snowy mountain massifs shone with snow. The cabin opened the curtain out into the street and left the tent, examining everything around. Holding the curtain with his hand and starting the frosty air, he looked back. The girl was still in bed, covered with a beige blanket. She slept sweetly. Snowfall covered the city, and the tops of the castle began to be covered with snow. By this time, the emperor stood in the middle of the room in his castle. A subject approached him from behind. Without turning to the interlocutor, he asked with a grin, "Did she definitely die?" Then the subject answered, "Yes, I'm sure." The emperor doubted. "How can you be sure if there is not even a body?" The subject continued, "I found traces of blood. It was exactly eaten by mountain animals." The emperor was silent. The fair-haired emperor calmed down a little. "Okay, and the relic?" The subject was nervous. We still haven't found her. It seems to be stolen for a long time." The emperor faded from the news and screamed, "This cannot be. Until recently she was with the empress. The relic should be somewhere nearby. Search all the places related to Her Majesty. Find and bring me a relic." The emperor looked angrily at the subject. He bowed his head and answered, "I obey. Praise to the sun, Tanatos." His Majesty looked after the departing man, clenching into fists. Then he brought his hand to his face and thought about something. Crap. The emperor covered his mouth with his hand. "I will tear me out now. By the power transmitted from generation to the heirs of the throne of Thanatos, was death. She passed to the heir when he became the emperor. Depending on the heir, her power was different. Therefore, the power of Galoti was not so great. This force could only be used in public. Quietly plant a plain plague and leave painfully dying. Each time the use of force brings returns. And Geloti, who recently committed the mass murder of close empress. Now I just suffered from this return." The emperor bent to the ground and covered his mouth with his hand. Moreover, even having such a force, he could not kill Rosalyn. All because of the wedding ceremony. During the oath, Emperor Thanatos drips his blood into holy water and sings the empress with it. This was one of the rites showing that spouses should not go against each other no matter what. He wanted to kill her in another way, but the familiar jewel of her family defended her. The emperor, sitting on the floor and covering his mouth with his hand, coughed and laughed at the same time. He finally succeeded. The emperor burst into an evil and hysterical laugh. Then he screamed all over the room, and his scream was echoed. "So you need. Was you outstanding? Look now, she died." The fair-haired man visible noticeably. He began to gloat even more. "You should have known your place." Suddenly, the man turned to the side, noticing the approach of a certain object to him. A smile from his face instantly disappeared, and his eyes widened at the moment. A large picture fell a meter from the emperor. He cried out and then crawled back. After what happened, all the maids and the servants came to a loud sound. "What happened, Your Majesty?" They began to survive him from different sides, asking, "Are you okay? What is happening here?" He answered with a dissatisfied face, "Nothing special. Raise me to rise. And yet, throw this damn picture." The maids raised her and held her in their hands. Raising his gaze, he became angry even more and frowned, looking forward. His gaze fell on the picture of Empress Rosalyn, a picture of Empress, past the servants. He peered into this picture. The emperor wrinkled and felt disgust. After that, at the moment, he put his hand on the hilt of the sword and sharply took it out. He mercilessly cut the picture of Rosalyn into pieces, violently shouting, "Direct, die, this witch." The emperor shouted, "Please die." All the servants present, having heard this, looked at him in fear. After some time, he bowed his head in front of this picture, lowering his sword to the floor. The man looked tiredly at the fully cut portrait of Empress Rosalyn. His sword fell loudly on the floor from his hands, leaving behind a tense silence in the room. The emperor knelt over him and wrapped his arms around his head, sighing, surrounded by servants. The town began to fall asleep even more with snow, and it was cold on the street. Many people went on a sandy desert. The road did not promise to be easy. The people who moved ahead rode horses with full confidence in their actions. The scorching sun was breaking through the scattered clouds. There was impossible heat. The former empress pressed up to the table and thought, "It would be better to leave me to freeze in the snow." This stuffiness contrasted so much with the usual weather of those places where it came from. The girl thought, "How long have I already with him?" She remembered the day when she opened her eyes and saw the silhouette of a man hanging over herself. After that, she immediately went through to think in this channel, and she switched to her hands. Rosalyn stared at her fingers, which not so long ago bleed and were covered with scratches. But now her palms and fingers looked almost like new ones. Even without healing ointments, they almost healed. Then the girl squinted her gaze to the side to look at the face of her savior, and then she came to her mind. Maybe it's all about him, but this guess was thrown back at the next moment. The girl did not believe her own thoughts. No, stupidity. Over the past 100 years, the fifth fragment has not appeared. So, this man cannot be them. But why then did I recover so quickly? As if feeling her anxiety, the man asked, "How do you feel?" Rosalyn dumbfounded. Her eyes opened for sure, not expecting any concern from the side of the table. Then the girl hid traces of confusion from her face and said, "Let you save me, but I can die at any moment." Hearing such a statement from the girl's lips, disappointment was reflected on the face of Tamon. He sat on black kolya, holding a girl in white clothes in his arms, and smiled softly. "Spit." In the man's voice, the warmth was heard, which was not like him. "I will save you as many times as required." Hearing such a statement by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Rosalyn frowned. The next moment, she again shaved her gaze at him, wanting to make sure that he had no hidden intentions. But as soon as she did it, as a man loudly announced to everyone, "Arrived." Then his voice became quieter, so that only the Empress heard him. "This is my country." The capital of the country of Amor was not very large. It consisted of a castle and a small residential quarter. This city was called Guinness. The delegation was immediately met by commoners with screams and words of support, praising the great Tamon. All from small to great greeted the dark-haired man with words. "Long live there." The expression on the man's face still softened when he looked at the girl on his hands. She pressed her face, hiding her, but the next moment she coughed. This may have been a symptom of some kind of illness. The table immediately turned to Lonaso to notify the fact that he would have to leave the delegation earlier. After Lonaso looked at him, he said, "Urgent affairs appeared. I will go first, so provide reports, please." The red-haired guy confused. This was not the first time that the table leaves him like this for this woman. The man rode on a horse at such a speed, as if the Empress on his hands was on the verge of life and death. As soon as he got to his possessions, as a man ran out to the meeting, "Have you decided to come here right away?" Apparently, that person was the head of the servant. Since then, he ordered others to take care of the owner. The man looked worried. He looked at the general and asked, "Who are you holding in your arms?" But the table chose not to answer the questions of this old man, but simply shaved his gaze at him and asked, "Have you already prepared water?" It seemed that the whole servant was afraid of its master. Fear was reflected on the butler's face. "Yes, everything is ready." After a couple of moments, Tamon brought the Empress to the bathroom, which was at the end of the long corridor. The head of the servant opened the door for him and said, "Come on." The manor held in his arms an Empress. Already standing on the threshold, the minister turned and ordered, "From this minute, no one to go." After that, with a loud knock, he slammed the heavy door of the bathhouse behind him and disappeared behind her. The bathhouse looked quite spacious and elegant. An elaborate chandelier hung on the ceiling, and the water was crystal clean. The elements of the clothing of the table flew by the floor a few seconds after its entrance to the bathhouse. He also took care of Rosalyn, laying a towel on the floor and putting it on him. Then the man gently touched her hand. With such lighting, it was clearly visible how pale the girl had the skin. The cabin sincerely smiled and thought, "The wounds have already managed to drag on." A towel was tied on his belt. He grabbed the girl in his arms and carried her to the water. The man stepped one foot in a hot bath. The water was so warm that steam was coming from it. At that moment, when the girl's body touched hot water, she cried out. The table said, "Woke up?" The next second, the girl was indignant and asked loudly, "Where are we?" The man answered quite quickly to this question. "In my house." "More precisely, in the bathroom," Rosalyn asked. "In a personal bathroom?" "Of course. I heard that in Amra they love to take a bath because of the heat, but so that even people could not afford such a room. But the girl broke out of her thoughts the next second. Her gaze fell on something strange. She looked at the hanger where the clothes were hung. There, in the middle of things, a dagger for self-defense also hung. He was suspended on a rope to a wooden hook. The shine of the blade looked threatening. The cabin did not fully understand her bewilderment, and also directed his gaze there. "What are you looking at?" The next moment, the girl rose from the water, looking at the man and calling his name. She continued, "You made the wrong choice, deciding to save me." Then the man smiled easily, as if understanding what she wanted to lead this dialogue to. He also got up from the water and leaned over the girl as he was clearly higher. "I myself decided what was right and what not." The former empress herself, not noticing thee, began to step back, although in her movements there was some elusive concentration. After that, the girl seemed to smile easily and said quietly, "Insolent." The smile of Tamona became even wider. His eyes, on the contrary, narrowed beyond recognition. Infallibility is inherent in everyone. At the moment when the girl went far enough, the distance that she considered safe, she asked, "And what is your goal?" The table focused all his attention on how confidently she pronounced her words. His gaze picked her face, and after that, he lowered his eyes below. But a little later, in embarrassed eyes, he looked away. In the head of the girl, notes of ridicule were heard. "I really did not think that the table is able to confuse the appearance of a woman." Then the man scratched his head and said, "I, too, did not think that I could so passionate about the empress of another country." In response to this, Rosalyn raised an eyebrow and said, "If you need a woman, then look for another. Surely there are a lot of wanting." The table continued to smile and retorted, "Still, however, all of them are not you." The next moment, the girl Snopia tried to move away. "You say so, as if you need only me." The man was approaching. "That's right, you are the one I want." At some point, Rosalyn was on the border of the bath, standing on land. "Nonsense, I have nothing." Meanwhile, the cabin began to realize even more to what everything leads to. "You are mistaken, you have a lot." The next moment, he began to list all the good qualities that he saw in Rosalyn. "Your experience, mind, body, and your heart." He came closer to her as the Empress moved away. "I want all this." A smile on her face became even more pronounced after Rosalyn realized that she had almost fulfilled her plan. "In that case," the girl said, "I really feel sorry." And the cabin finally realized what she was about to do, and because of this, he became scared. In the next instant, she grabbed the same dagger for self-defense from a hanger. Her movements were sharp and clumsy. Rosalyn looked crazy. She brought the dagger to her throat and said, "I have nothing to give you." The cabin came into even greater bewilderment and confusion. His pupils narrowed so much that his eyes seemed almost white. Drops of scarlet blood sprinkled onto the clean floor of the bath. What the minister was not ready for was so fast, but the table already knew what to do at the next moment. His confusion was caused by the fact that he did not think that the girl would decide on this. Once again, he looked at the bloodied dagger and realized that he needed to act very quickly. He started his hand under the neck of Rosalyn and said, "This damn woman." He tried his best to save, and she again for her. He looked at the bleeding fresh cut on the girl's neck, who so much wanted to die. At the same time, Rosalyn thought, strange, truly strange. Someone was eager to brutally kill me. The next moment, the table pushed his lips to the bleeding wound on the girl's neck. And to save someone. After a few seconds, she began to gradually recover. She certainly did not expect this. It was not possible to die. Then the Menkini raised it in his arms and said, "Thank God the wound is not deep." The girl thought, "Crazy." The man clenched his teeth. Drops of blood were still visible on his lips after a recent resurrection. How dared to die? Rosalyn began to gradually open his eyes. She heard, "You left yourself to the mercy of fate." Then the man finished the phrase. "And I picked up." The Empress immediately rebelled in the head of the Empress about how she was cold in the mountains. The minister's voice was heard warmly, although his face spoke of the opposite. "And saved you, giving your vitality." Having agreed, he hugged her stronger than ever. "Therefore, so desperately, I hold you in my hands." The Empress still put up with the consequences of her uprising from an almost afterlife life and mumbled something, and the cabin clenched his teeth and hissed through them. So, no. He squeezed his arms even more and said, "Now you are mine." Meanwhile, on the main street of the city, everyone met delegates. It was lively. Someone called Lonaso from the crowd. Lonaso immediately recognized this voice. It was none other than the Queen of Amur Terence Rantif. The girl asked, "Why don't you go to the royal palace? But are you standing here?" And he only thought, "Tamon, asshole." And while Lonaso put up with her fate, the queen frowned and asked, "Do you ignore my words?" The girl was at a loss about the silence of the delegate, and the delegate himself did not know what to do. Then he still decided to get off his horse and somehow explain the emerging embarrassment. "In no case, Your Majesty. Thanks to the care of Her Majesty, we returned safely," the girl said. "I knew that you were on the way," but she could not have imagined that the delegates would return today. And then she wondered, "Where is the cabin?" He said the first thing that came to mind. Probably got angry because of the Emperor Thanatos, because he was struck by the disease. Lonaso continued, "The table could not say about this to subordinates. Therefore, having warned me, he immediately went into his possessions. And in truth, if you see the Emperor of Thanatos, the disease that was not there will appear, because they are nausea nasty genus." It seemed that the queen believed in this bike so composed on the go. "By the way, I am worried. This is the first time that the disease made itself felt." And then she said what the poor Lonaso shocked and mentally buried himself. "I have to go to him now." Lonaso began to dissuade her. "Or maybe then, is it possible to greet me first?" The poor fellow tried to do everything only to distract her. "You partially heard about what the Emperor Thanatos did this time." Then Lonaso came up with something and said, "Would you like to hear about it in more detail?" The expression of the queen's face changed dramatically, and she smiled, intrigued, and then she announced loudly, "Then let's first hold a banquet in honor of the return. Greetings, gentlemen." And while Lonaso rejoiced because his lie was a success, the queen, looking at him, whispered something to the maid. The man couldn't think in any way that his words about the disease of Tamon's disease would have doubtfully doubt. He, on a white horse, led the rest of the delegation on black horses forward. We enter the palace, and while the whole delegation was heading to the royal castle in order to draw up a report, the queen came up with something. She sent one of her personal maids so that she would approach one of the delegation messengers. The girl said, "From this moment, please follow me." The man did not expect this at all, but still, he followed this girl in turquoise robes. He did not have the right to resist the will of the queen. Meanwhile, in the bathhouse of the man's estate, steam still rose from the water. Two people were sitting on a parapet of baths. The habit was eagerly kissed by the Empress. He did it as if he had his last opportunity to kiss her now. The door to the bathhouse all this time remained closed. No one dared to go in, as the owner ordered them. The Empress squinted her eyes and thought, "Does he really treat me in this way?" The girl did not resist the actions of the table for some time. His monologue about the value of life so sunk into her soul. But then it seemed to her that everything that was happening was a little crossing that thin line between simple treatment and something big. She hastened to push the man away from herself, not wanting with him any close connection, except his voluntary compulsory treatment. Rosalyn clenched her teeth and expressed her dissatisfaction with some kind of mechanical short sound. After that, the girl pulled away even more, but noticed, "I really feel completely healthy." The table continued to smile maliciously. "What to do now? You regret that you could not die?" The man noticed how the girl was looking at him and said, "Do not look so viciously. This is your view and expression." And then he said something that made the Empress mentally return to the past. "I will make them hot." She focused more and more on his words about her gaze, and involuntarily recalled the moment from the past. On that day, her ex-husband, the Emperor, told someone from the nobility, "The place where I sleep. I don't know if it is a bedroom or a stable on the street." Instead of hugging the Empress, "Will it not be warmer in a hug with an ice doll?" Someone threw unflattering comments towards the Empress. "Any man will cool down in front of this woman." The girl squeezed her lips even more, as if not wanting to return to her past anymore. She quietly asked, "Leave me alone, the local." And the man answered, "And if I do not want to?" Then the girl asked, "I look like a person who will obey orders?" She said fairly honestly, "Yes, I threw myself to die, and you picked up on how you think it would come out of this." After these words, the girl's face became very serious, and the eyebrows frowned. "Will I live or die? I will decide it myself." Hearing this from the mouth of the Empress, the man involuntarily exhaled. At heart, he understood that the girl should also want to live. In his eyes, notes of disappointment again reflected. He knew that he himself could not change anything, right? But at the same time, he was glad that her former determination returned to the Empress. "This is exactly you." He also knew that the girl had changed. Not so, which longed for its death, forgetting about everything. He clearly remembered that emptiness in the eyes of this poor woman at the moment when his hands closed on her neck. But now the cabin looked at the girl sitting in front of him and thought, "You are 100 times more beautiful." The next moment, he held out his hand to Rosalyn's face and exhaled. "Such are you." He touched the girl's pointed chin and said, "You make me impatient." She was clearly not happy with such a gesture on his part and hit him on the arm. "Enough!" At this moment, the man came into misunderstanding from how Rosalyn could change his thoughts so quickly. She just wanted to kill herself, and now she already looked like a person who could stand up for himself. "Don't touch anymore." But as soon as she ended the phrase, "To my lips, how it hit," the man immediately violated her request and kissed her. Having pulled away from his lips, a smile slept, as if he had just been forbidden to him something too important for him. And while the girl was still confused, he said, "Fine, I promise." The man closed his eyes and said with a respectful tone, "If you don't like it, I will not do it anymore." But still, there was some hidden meaning in this. It was written in his gaze. "I will not touch your lips as it hit, I swear." The girl with tears in her eyes said, "Didn't I hate you?" She continued, "Why do you continue to torment me?" The table only looked at her with a smile. Then he answered her, "I have never experienced hatred for you. Irritation, yes, but not hatred." Rosalyn looked at him with a perplexing look. The man began to speak. "Anyway, it was I who saved you sharing part of my life." The Empress began to object. "I did not ask you about it." The table looked at her with a smile. "If there are no reasons, then it remains to find them again, right?" The man found the girl by surprise. He began to list. Revenge, the collapse of Thanatos, hatred, after which Empress Rosalyn answered, "Such things do not interest me." The black-haired pulled her by the light strand of hair closer to him and asked, "Then what about love?" Her eyes expanded at one point, and she looked perplexed at the interlocutor. Then the man added, "You have a nice reddened face now." It seems that my words were shocked. Night. Only some of the windows of houses are burning, and the light wind sways the remaining foliage. As soon as the Empress touched her head to the pillow, her eyes immediately closed. She got comfortable and thought, "How much I'm tired today." The city plunged into a nightmare. Herds of monsters ran through the streets that were like bulls. People panicked. On the flock moving forward, they instructed their spears, shouting something unintelligible. These red monsters fell out of a black crack in the sky. One of the people in armor shouted. One ran into a shelter. Faster, the Emperor with the Empress in danger. In the room, which was cracks and garbage, people sat with the Empress and Emperor. A girl with red hair was sitting on the floor and screaming, "Rosalyn! I'm scared." She, in turn, promised and reassured in a calm tone, "Everything is fine. I will protect you," the Empress thought. It is amazing, just during the visit of the imperial family, a crack arose to the shelter. Then, a large red monster crawled out of a huge hole in the wall, which went directly to people. The fair-haired thought, "By the time the guard will come up, at least one of us will remain alive." Rosalyn sat next to the children, and the Emperor, taking his sword, directed him towards the monster. His breath caught, but he reassured people, trying to hide them. "Do not worry, Empress," the man said with an evil smile. "I can own a sword. It costs nothing to deal with one. On, get it." The first blow with a sword fell on the face of a monstrous beast. It immediately revealed a huge green mouth and published a loud, deafening roar. The beast got angry even more and headed towards Empress Rosalyn and a little girl. The Empress's face turned pale, and her eyes widened with fear. She said, Dangerous. The next moment, she deftly dodged the stroke of the horns of a large beast, covering the girl. The Empress wanted to scream with fear, but hesitated. She closed her mouth with her hand and thought, "No, you can't scream. The beast is susceptible to the sound, so you need to be silent." The Emperor, directing the blade of the sword onto the monster, screamed, "You! I have not finished yet. I'll show you what it means." He did not have time to finish. The sword fell out of his hands, and the man felt a blow to his stomach. Then he was thrown back a couple of meters back into the wall. The fair-haired screamed. A huge stone fell right on his face suddenly from the ceiling, and the Emperor cried out. He knelt down, pressing his nose into his nose from pain. My nose, while the beast looked at him. Holding on to the injured nose, the Emperor was nervous. And where is the security? Immediately. A monstrous beast with red eyes and huge growths looked him directly in the eye. The Emperor, having waited a few seconds, threw the sword to the side and quickly rushed away from the monster. Children, sitting in a heap and watching the Emperor run away, were at a loss. The fair-haired Emperor hid behind the wooden plane, which was behind the children. He looked cowardly from there with one eye, examining the monster and evaluating the situation. The children hugged stronger and looked at His Majesty. Does the Emperor use us as a shield? The eldest of them thought, if so, then we are in danger. What to do? The boy began to go towards Empress Rosalyn. Surely Her Majesty knows what to do. The fair-haired woman lowered her gaze to the floor, not daring to look at the boy. She was silent. The lady looked at the sword lying on the floor. Child, can you help me? The boy answered, yes. Amazing! If the beast fits and crashes into the door, we can get out. Rosalyn put her hand to the boy's cheek and looked with tenderness. Can you scream hard? They all turned around and looked at the red monster, which moved back a little. After that, the boy, having gained courage, got up and that he shouted loudly. The Empress wrinkled a little from a loud sound and thought, you need to hurry. She took the sword in her hands and continued to think. There was a good opportunity. The boy continued to scream deafeningly. This opportunity cannot be missed. While the boy distracted the beast, the fair-haired Empress held his sword in her hand and slowly approached the monster. Suddenly, she took the hilt in both hands, waved onto the red beast. The Emperor, who was at the raised table at 3 children, looked scared. The man watched everything that was happening in bewilderment. 3 children clenched more tightly into a heap, hugged and trembled with fear. Pulling the sword blade several times in the monster, it fell dead to the floor. Empress Rosalyn exhaled with some relief, and drops of sweat flowed down her cheeks. Then she turned around, and her hair was stained in the blood of a terrible beast. The pink-haired girl, standing with a sword in her hand, turned back and looked at the Emperor. A fair-haired man looked at Rosalyn, then at the children, and did not know how to justify himself. The children looked at him angrily, pressing themselves against each other. He began, I am the Emperor of this country, and my security is above all. Why are you staring at me like that? Rosalyn squeezed the hilt of the sword even more, listening to the excuses of His Majesty. The man shouted deafeningly, holding his head with his hands. In the city lay the bodies of amazed red monsters, and the guard in blue cloaks continued to save people. A few days later, the palace of Thanatos, as before, stood snowy. The Emperor with Natasha, who leaned against him, stood in the room. She said, Will you give, Your Majesty? The Emperor was distracted from the words of his mistress and looked forward at the figure walking in their direction. Empress Rosalyn, with her subject, passed by, a stone face past them, with a stone face, while restraining. Her expression was calm. She tried not to react to this meeting. Mistress Natasha, standing next to the man, looked contemptuously at the Empress. After a couple of seconds, she noticed that Rosalyn was leaning on a cane. Passing by the girl, Natasha told the Emperor, You were right, Your Majesty, she is lame. He grinned and said, Yes, but for a cripple, it behaves very arrogantly. The Empress continued to go forward along the red carpet, with a companion, trying to ignore their words. Rosalyn suddenly wakes up in bed, realizing that all this was a dream. Then she stood up a little, rubbing her forehead with her hand, and thought. 3 years have passed after that day. She was sad and continued to think. I wonder if everything is in order with that child. She recalled how a brave boy shouted rampant in front of the beast for the sake of their salvation. The Empress continued to think. In front of the banquet, I left him a gift. He will definitely protect him, but… The fair-haired lady resolutely rose from the bed and got up, looking around the empty and dark room. In short steps, she headed towards a bulky balcony in one sleeping robe. Rosalyn approached him and thought, "Now I can die." With one deft movement, she opened the door to the balcony. A cool night wind blew her face. Then her eyes stared forward, looking around the unprecedented expanses. Before her from the balcony, a magnificent view of the endless and blue sea opened. She leaned on the fence, thinking, "Is this the sea that I just heard about?" The Empress watched the sea surface with pleasure, continuing to think. So this exists. The girl bowed her head and closed her eyes a little. A good look before death. Rosalyn slowly was about to fly a hedge in order to end life. At the last moment, she sat on the partition, hanging her legs to the sea. "Thank you for showing me the sea, Tamon." Her feet glided carefully down, and she was ready to feel the cold of seawater. At that moment, the black-haired man saved her again. He acquired the girl, thereby not allowing her to fall. "It seems that henceforth I should be alert even during sleep." The girl leaned against his face. "Drummer?" With one movement, he pulled Rosalyn to him and took her in his arms. "I thought I should change my promise. I will treat you when you get sick or get hurt. I will do everything possible for you to live. But there are some problems with the method of treatment. Do you understand what I am talking about?" He looked at the girl's face. "Even knowing this, you continue to do such stupid things." The man continued, "I should think that you yourself want it." Rosalyn was indignant. "What?" "If so, you can say in words. Even if you do not try to die, I will listen to you at any time." In response, the Empress asked him to stop carrying nonsense, to which the table only smiled at. He brought the girl into the room. "Since you woke up, how about a walk?" she said. "I won't go. Let go." She nervously closed her eyes, thinking about the words of a black-haired man. After a while, they rushed riding a horse. "Where are we going, the local?" he answered. "I don't know, in a good place." He looked at Rosalyn with a grin, saying, "Hold on stronger." He continued to smile, thinking, "Seeing her healthy, I think that my abilities are not so useless." 5 years ago. The table lay on the bed. The body temperature rose a lot. The disease that was passed down from generation to generation in our family began to torment me. If I did not accidentally stumble upon a dilapidated manuscript in the corner of the family library, he would have died without knowing the truth. The lost fifth piece of power was called life. The reasons why it did not appear from the appearance of others. There was no person who could withstand the power of this force. If the accumulated heat for a certain period of time cannot be discarded, then the heart will stop. The way to release this heat was to throw out or give it to someone. A simple solution was just to be with girls. But oddly enough, I did not want to do that. He was sick of the smell of powder, and he covered his nose while next to the girls. The girls asked what was happening to him, while he hastily left them. The table tried to restrain himself and just went away from the fair sex. He thought, stepping over a decent distance and letting go of his nose with his hand. What a nasty smell. Remembering Rosalyn, he continued to think. But if you look, then this woman did not come such a smell. He emerged from his memories and brought himself to his senses. What I think about now. Then a female voice was suddenly heard, and the man woke up from his memories. "Tamon Krasis," he asked. "What's happened?" Rosalyn, being in his arms, asked, "What is this place?" The man smiled and said, "This is my personal forest. I wanted to show it to you." The Empress, stepping on the cool earth with bare feet, moved back a little. The table, continuing to hold her hand, listened. "I did not know that you were such a spontaneous person." The Empress turned a little, having retired. She continued to speak. "What exactly did you want to show?" He reached for her palm, smiling. "Will I take your hand?" Rosalyn answered displeasedly that she could go herself. But the man warned that there was slippery earth. He spoke with a hint. "If you fall once, you can no longer get out." The table slowly approached her, holding his hand, and finished the phrase. "Yes, like me." With a smile and tenderness, he looked at the Empress Rosalyn under the cover of the night. Then he took her bright hand in his, weightlessly pulling him to him. The man took a couple of steps forward with the girl and said, "Here, We are almost in place. Having noticed something to the side, the dark-haired spoke. Here they are. Stepping barefoot on cool, moist grass, the Empress took steps forward. Two stood in a clearing completely dotted with lunar luminous butterflies. The table began to tell, and Rosalyn looked up. They glow and appear when the moon rises, and they still can't live in a cold environment, so you would not be able to see them in your country. You need to survive within 10 months to become the way now. They fly for 10 days and mate for 2 days. After that, after 3 days, eggs are laid and die. What a short life they have. The girl raised her hand up to the light butterflies and whispered softly, "Marvelous." She did not bother to admire the beauty of flying insects, saying, "It is like a dance of stars." The table turned to her and asked, "Do you know why these butterflies emit light?" The Empress, for a second, tearing her eyes off the butterflies, looked inquiringly at the interlocutor. He approached a pink-haired one and answered, "The reason is simple, but very important. To live. They radiate the light, desperately waving their wings to live, as if speaking. I look at me here." The lady thought about these words. Thinking a little, she answered, "But they will die anyway, even if they lay eggs." One of the butterflies flew right in front of the nose of the Empress Rosalyn. A smiling, dark-haired man looked at Rosalyn again and said, "No, there is a difference. Will you die by laying the eggs, or will you simply turn into dust between them?" They were still in the middle of the field, surrounded by beautiful creatures. One of the butterflies sat in the hand of a man. A huge difference. Will you die without doing anything, or— The Empress thought up. "You will die, leaving something after you." Does he mean this? The beautiful lady continued to admire the butterflies in the night. She seriously thought about everything that was said by a man. The red-haired gentleman in Amora hurriedly rushed somewhere on the bay horse. He was clearly in a hurry. It flashed through his head. Trouble, trouble. Last night. The feast in honor of the return of the table and accompanying. Let's drink for the glory of Amora. The ruler, raising his glass with a grin, confirmed in a calm voice, "For Amora." He turned to the subject. "Lonaso. I heard that the minister brought something from Thanatos." He spat out the liquid. He continued to ask, "What is it?" The man wiped his smudges with his hand in surprise. The ruler continued, "I'm very interesting." Red-haired shouted right there, "My stomach!" He nervously took up his stomach. "Your Majesty, something's stomach was ill. I will leave for a while." The emperor looked at him suspiciously, and then took a sip from the glass. The red-haired man rushed. "Queen! Theo already knows." "Crap." "Chang'an." What he was thinking about. His horse, seeing a huge gate in front of him, braked sharply and climbed his hind legs. The young man dismounted, holding his hand on the saddle and looking at the big mansion behind the gate. Soon he entered and confidently headed for the room he needed, clenching his fists. Seeing a guard near the door, he shouted rudely. "Fasten," he answered. "Mr. Lonaso, why are you so—" "This is a very important business regarding the queen," the guard insisted. The master said not to disturb him. He was angry. "What is more important than the queen's business?" he answered. "I am more afraid of my master than the queen." The red-haired one wanted his own, grabbed the door handle, shouted, "Go away from the road." The guard, contrary to, having entered the room abruptly and without knocking, the man rushed. "This is me!" A disaster happened. Not even having time to finish saying the phrase, the table kissed him. The knife blade flew very close to the head of the red-haired one, hitting his cheek. Then the black-haired, lying next to the Empress, ordered, "Away." Lonaso examined the hair of a lying girl and thought, "This woman is the dead Empress Thanatos." The cabin continued. "Seeing that you are still here, it seems to you will not care if I get your eyes." He took another knife by the handle and directed it towards the opponent. After that, already due to the creak of the door, the quick was heard. "I'm leaving, leaving." The guard closed his eyes and said, "That's why I told you not to go there, isn't it?" The red-haired one sat down on the sofa and spoke with a man. How much we will make hit his bedroom, a sick person. A gray-haired man handed him a piece of fabric. "Here, take, Mr. Lonaso." He first looked at the guard at first, and then at the fabric. "Why do I need a scarf?" The man showed on his face a place that was injured. "You have blood, Mr. Lonaso." Taking a scarf from the guard, he continued to speak. "Crap." His skills are as always on top, he thought, wiping blood. If not for the disease, he would have become a ghost on the battlefield and instilled horror to enemies. Calm down. As the commander of the Knights Order of Barnes, I cannot allow him to be considered worse than a sick person. Tamon, Theo, and I. We were three inseparable friends since childhood. When we went to school in the royal palace, I mocked him in every possible way and played. When our family fell traitors due to the fact that we were friends from childhood, he helped me a lot. If the cabin did not save me from the stigma of the traitor, I would now lay in the ground with my family. He is a friend who helped me once. Therefore, I don't even know whether to obey him or not. The voice of the table was heard. He impressively left the room, asking, "What are you? What is your business?" He sat in front of him. "Once so rash broke into someone else's bedroom, we will listen once." Men staged a tea party. The cups stood on the table. A conversation was foreseen. Two young people sat opposite each other. On both sides there were their cups of tea. The dark-haired one turned around and looked after the departing watchman, waiting for him to leave the room. The table turned back when he heard a cough from the interlocutor, which meant the beginning of the conversation. The red-haired man brought his hand to his face and began to speak. "I think it's time to talk honestly," he began. "You brought that woman with you, right?" The table answered. "I don't understand what you are talking about." Lonaso could not restrain himself, and immediately after the words of the dark-haired switched to a scream. "About that woman." The man hesitated a little, and first said nothing, staring at the opponent. His gaze became cunning and wary. He squinted his eyes a little and asked, "Have you seen?" Continuing to scream, the redhead said, "True, I saw. And even her silver hair color." After these words, the cabin squinted from anger even more. "In this case, you have to tear your eyes out." Lonaso began to laugh at the moment, putting his hands forward with a smile. "Yes, I have not seen anything," he continued. "Here you are serious. You can behave like that with me, but not with Her Majesty." Then the table intended to raise a mug with a drink, asking, "Her Majesty?" Bringing the bowl to his lips, he asked the interlocutor, "Why did you suddenly get a conversation about this?" Lonaso answered him, leaning his hand against his face. "She was interested in who you brought from Thanatos." He added indignantly, "It seems that someone was already ahead of us and reported this to Her Majesty." The dark-haired man set the bowl on the saucer back after the sip and began, "I'll ask again." The red-haired man held his head with his hand, frowning. "Are you going to tell Her Majesty about this woman?" A smile flashed on the lips of a dark-haired man. He grinned softly. The table looked up. His lips stretched out in a grin. He answered. Memories surged. Sunlight illuminated the girl that she turned cheerfully. She exclaimed, "Rosie!" Sitting under a tree, a girl with red braids smiled and said, "Honestly, I like Kane." She held out her hand, brewing tea from a white kettle. The girl invited, "Sit down here. I will brew delicious tea." Empress Rosalyn stood in a clearing. Her face expressed surprise. She thought, "Anna." Without thinking twice, she went to the spread blanket and sat down near the girl. The red-haired girl carefully poured liquid into a cup of interlocutor. However, Rosalyn, looking at the cup, saw that there was not tea at all and stunned. In her hands was a small white cup filled with blood. The liquid shimmered behind the sides, dragged around. At the moment, they both turned out to be a space where the red-haired one sat in a puddle, and her hands were tied with chains. Rosalyn's eyes widened, and she turned to the girl. "Charlotte?" The blonde girl froze in amazement, not quite understanding what was happening. Immediately, she saw the heads of her parents flying down. "Father! Mother!" The words of her mom and dad sounded. "Our beloved Rosie." She closed her mouth with her hands in order to hold back her tears. Words were heard in her head. "Your Majesty, you should always be unshakable." Rosalyn still could not restrain himself. Bitter tears poured from her eyes, sitting in a pool of blood. Suddenly, someone turned to the girl behind. "Rosie, I should better protect you." A man came up behind her. "Every strict word was upset, right?" she exclaimed. "Grandfather!" "I did not want to give you to the imperial family. I was afraid that you would suffer. Sorry to leave the first." The girl with tears in her eyes began to argue. "This is not so, grandfather. It was my choice. The relief that you left first. As if your soul was tormented if you saw how torture they subject me. Rosalyn held his hand in her, but after a couple of seconds, she disappeared at the moment, like her grandfather himself. The Empress sat alone again, and warm tears were sharpened from her eyes. Grandfather? The girl with a pale face froze. Tears did not stop leaking down her cheeks. She realized that no grandfather was nearby. She tried to smile broadly, even through tears, looking up. Going to the cliff and leaving bloody tracks, she thought. Everything is fine. We will meet soon. After which, without thinking twice, Empress Rosalyn took a step into the void immediately. She quickly fell down, not expressing any emotions, and without thinking about anything. From below, with the humble expression, stood a cabin, who was ready to catch her. The girl, after a couple of seconds of flight, easily fell into his arms, and he wrapped her around her. He neatly sank with her, squatted, and laid it on the floor, holding it by the shoulders. The man said, "No matter how many times you try to die, I will save you again." Rosalyn tried to grow up herself, indignant. "Let go, I have no more reason to live." He raised the girl's face up and looked into her tearful eyes. "If they are no longer there, do you need to find new ones?" He approached her ear and began to whisper. "What do you want? Hatred? Retribution? The fall of Thanatos?" The Empress almost immediately pushed him off with both hands. "I don't need it." The black-haired man touched her hair, highlighting one strand, and ran through her hand. Then, taking her to him a little closer, he looked first into her eyes, and then on the lips. "How about love?" The blonde shuddered, her eyes opened wide. Then she froze with a stunned gaze. Empress Rosalyn at the moment was nervous and felt lost. Suddenly she woke up. She was surrounded by 3 girls. One of them went to the bed and asked, "Woke up?" She continued, "We were so worried. You breathed heavily. Is everything good with you?" All 3 stood in a row. "We were late with a greeting. I am your Mael, Tasha and Louis twins." They continued, "The color of your hair is so beautiful. Take care of us from now on, mistress." Rosalyn was perplexed. Then the streams of tears flowed on the cheeks of the Empress, and she bowed her head. She could no longer restrain her hysteria, and, clinging to the clothes that she was on her, cried. The twins looked at each other, and the eldest maid, seeing that the lady was crying, was frightened. "Gemini ran away somewhere meanwhile?" Errol asked. "Beautiful mistress, why are you crying?" 2 girls hurriedly fled along the corridor, trying to find a man. "Master!" They ran to him and bowed their heads. "Wait, don't run," the girls told. Something happened. The twins shouted in chorus. "That incredibly beautiful woman, she—" the table asked. "What is she?" Then they also shouted in chorus. "She cries continuously." The girls were numb after their master quickly rushed past them. He ran to Rosalyn in one green robe, and the twins only looked after him. They looked at each other again and screamed. "I understood correctly? Exactly?" 2 girls again looked after the runaway by the habitation with a grin. They ran back and began to scream. "We ran faster, write everything. I already have goosebumps." The senior maid hugged the Empress, whispering strange words. "Lursha Lesha. Everything will be fine. Everything is in order," Rosalyn thought. Lursha Lesha, a deity that a nanny from Asen often addressed. "This woman is also from there." Arel pulled away from the girl and looked kindly into her eyes, asking, "Bring you to drink?" Then a black-haired man entered the room where they were sitting. Both women looked around. His face was wary. The senior maid said with relief, "You came, master." The tearful Empress Rosalyn sat and looked at him in bewilderment. The girl was a little embarrassed and looked away, leaning her head against her shoulder. The mile of the mile, and gently turned to the man who went to the bed. "I will probably go." Approaching the place where Rosalyn was sitting, the table looked at her, while she hid her gaze. At some point, he thought and looked at the girl, without saying a word. After that, the black-haired man slowly began to squat and was on his knees. He stood right in front of the seated Empress and tried to touch her shoulders. Rosalyn, with traces of tears, again looked away from his face and grunted inquiringly. Sharply, the cabin grabbed the girl's shoulders and waist, tilting it to him and pressing it to him. He put his hand on her hair and his head on his shoulder and began to stroke her on the strands of her hair. The girl sat and did not quite understand what was happening. she asked briefly. What? She struck. What are you doing? Let go! The table said. After all the torture, what made you cry? After Rosalyn pulled away from him, he looked at her and asked. Something hurts, she answered. Ankles. So I want to lie down a little more. Next, she thought up. The first thing that came to mind. The black-haired man looked at her bare feet, one of which was bandaged. He said, the right ankle means. The table gently touched Rosalyn to the leg. The fair-haired young lady was a little embarrassed and thought to herself, What? What are you doing? The black-haired took the Empress as a foot and began to cover her with small kisses. The lady sat embarrassedly and looked at what was happening, while not daring to say anything. Even after some time, she sat and was silent, and her cheeks blushed. Remembering from Thanatos, it's snow on the street, and in one of the rooms it is heard. No words, I have no words. The Emperor was unhappy. This is just a little wound. I mean, we are in vain, is losing time in this shop. The Empress looked at him. He expressed sarcastically, not tired of adjusting the shoes under the leg? He continued contemptuously, laughter and nothing more. You just want to hide your vile leg. Not a single silk in the world, no skin can hide this ugliness. Idiot! What an idiot you are! Empress Rosalyn, after a long silence, asked, Isn't it disgusting to you from the sight of my leg? The black-haired smiled and looked at the girl. Not at all. She is beautiful, so much so that I want to kiss it. Rosalyn leaned toward him. Are you really unknown to shame? The cabin grinned and answered, Yes, it looks like that. The girl lay down. The conversation with you tires me, he answered. You can't imagine how I was starving. The man again picked up the girl in his arms and carried it to the exit of the room. So, why should we eat? What do you want? A few days ago, the wagon, in which the 2 horses were slying, rode quietly under the cover of the night. 2 men were sitting on it and spoke. The Empress was tortured. Madness, the Emperor went crazy. The second man, with a gesture, showed that he should talk quieter. If anyone hears, a boy was sitting between the boxes in the cart. They continued, But who will hear here? And this fearful mallet? He turned to him. Just try to report it to someone. I will put you with my picking. The boy with a huge scar on his face listened to the conversation. And Natasha, what will happen to the country now? The Empress stood in the middle of the room, and opposite her on her knees was a man. I ask you, Empress, she asked, are you sure? And he answered, Yes. For the sake of the Empress, I am ready for anything. Rosalyn spoke. In this case, arson. The boy raised his head and looked at her. She held out her hand with a pendant. Can you deliver this to the port of the Livre, what is in the northeast? When you arrive, find a merchant named Scarlet Snake. Give him this before he crosses the water. The Empress continued. However, the road to the Livre is dangerous, and the city itself, too. You are sure? The boy looked up at her from the bottom. Your Majesty, I will definitely fulfill your request. The lady looked at the young man for a while, and then approvingly patted his hair. She looked at him again with a good-natured smile and said, Thank you, Arson. It was a necklace, but I had to make a bracelet out of it so that it could be transported. It is necessary to convey the decoration. Talia is a marine area bordering on the livery, the habitat of the creature with which states fought. Once the creature was defeated, and trade in the city went within 2 months. The period was called the trading month, but soon it will end. If you accelerate, then in 10 days I will get there. But if I still be late, the boy looked at the bracelet. I don't know when I can meet this Scarlet Snake again. Then the young man resolutely squeezed his hand into his fist and thought, I will definitely have time. Suddenly, the wagon stops abruptly, and the boy falls. I rest on the floor. The young man hears a voice. Why now? Help! And he thinks, what is happening there? Suddenly, the door of the cart opens, and the boy is illuminated by a bright moonlight. He covers his face. People in black robes opened the door and said, This baby seems to be useful. One of them said, Take it! They began to pull the boy out of the cart, but he opposed. Let go! I belong to the Imperial Academy! Not having time to finish, the boy was closed his nose and mouth with a rag. The men looked at him for a while and pressed a rag more. After that, the boy's eyes began to involuntarily close, Everything around plunged the darkness. The Empress, along with the castle, arranged a meal. A large white table was located on the balcony. There was a bright sunset. The sun went beyond the sea surface, and its rays gently lit up the balcony. So this is what it is. Sea. A fair-haired girl watched with pleasure how the sun came in. While Rosalyn watched the rays and the luminous sea, the man looked at her admired. Black-haired condescending looked at her, immediately saying, "It looks like you really like it." The lady watched the landscape with a smile, answering, "Of course, but how else? This is the first time I see him." The table was surprised. "For the first time? Have you ever seen the sea before?" The girl answered, "Exactly." He was interested. "How did it happen?" "Thanatos, an empire that has access to the sea." Empress Rosalyn closed her eyes a little and smiled at her interlocutor. She spoke with some sadness and sorrow in her voice. "I could not leave the palace." Intending to eat something, the man thought a little and first answered the short. "That's how." Both enjoyed the evening. And suddenly, the silence reigned for a minute, which interfered with the waves. A fair-haired girl looked around the whole table and food on it. Why turn to a man? "By the way," showing one of the plates, she stole something to the fork. Rosalyn asked, "What is this?" The black-haired one shook and answered the girl, "This is a sea scallop." She listened carefully to him. "This is part of the Cateran mollusk. They are thinly cut and eaten raw, but you can cook." Putting one piece in his mouth, he lifted the cabin and said slurredly, "And today it is even tastier." The girl once again examined the whole table and thought about what the man had just said. Then the Empress stole the mollusk fork, intending to try. She brought the fork to her mouth and tried, trying to chew. Silence reigned again. The man smiled and closed his eyes, feeling that Rosalyn was satisfied. They continued the evening meal, enjoy the open sea, and a view of the sunset. Suddenly, Rosalyn froze and thought, "Interestingly, Arson safely reached the Liva?" And she looked at us in alarm into the distance and continued to think, "I hope everything is fine with him." She looked away, thinking about something of her own, and about the boy who entrusted the task. The Empress's gaze clung to the place where she almost ended yesterday and did not say goodbye to her life. The girl remembered how she was ready to give her soul to the cold sea and how the core saved her, hugging her. The fair, haired-in thought laid a fork on the table, trying to disperse her yesterday's memories. The table spoke. "Your look has changed. I remembered what I was going to do here recently." The man continued and said with a smile, "Since everything happened like that, I will ask about something." The sea began to rage, dispersing the waves. The table asked, "Why do you want to die so much?" The blonde girl sat and answered, "Nobody." Then she made a short pause. She folded her hands in front of her and tilted her head forward. "I could not protect anyone." Rosalyn turned to facing the sea and asked Tamon, "Do you think this is your fault?" The Empress answered, "My." The man began to think thoughtfully. "How strange. If you really were sorry," he continued, "their death would not be an excuse for death." Rosalyn, hearing these words, was nervous. The Empress immediately fell into a rage. She got up from her chair and leaned on the table. "An excuse, you say?" The black-haired man only smiled in response to such a vigorous reaction of the girl. He explained, "Suppose you bear the burden because you could not protect them." The lady calmed down a little. "But who said that the reckoning of the death of all people should be your death?" The table laid a hand on the table. Rosalyn's eyes widened, and drops of the hood ran down her cheek. She thought about what was said. The man continued to say, trying to reason the lady, "Or do you think that those people would wish your death?" The Empress bowed her head down, pondering the words for a few seconds. "No, they would not want it. Such an unfair death. Now you do not think their opinion is important? You are very cruel." His fair-haired interlocutor again began to switch to a cry. "No, this is not so." She leaned over the table, her lips trembled, and her head was full of thoughts. Rosalyn stood, leaning her hands on the table with a white tablecloth against the background of the setting sun. If I died, protecting my loved ones, and they would blame myself in my death." He spoke the cabin. In anticipation of the subsequent words of the black-haired, the Empress tried to restrain herself at the table with trembling hands. The man continued, That even from hell I would return to say, I'm fine. I want it to be so with you. He added, This is not your fault. Rosalyn, the hair that shook the sea breeze, looked at her interlocutor. The table slowly added one word. Brighter. After that, tears rolled down the ladies. Live happier than everyone. The girl leaned to the table so that he did not see her, and began to cry. In the head of the Empress, all those words that the dark-haired echoed, forcing her to sob. The Emperor was in some strange place. His legs constantly stuck to the floor. He indignantly asked, Where is I? It flashed in his thoughts. Here is so sticky and vile. He walked along the endless wasteland and shouted that there was urine. Someone! Is there anyone here? He thought. Giloti Thanatos. He was his father. A fair-haired man timidly turned to him. Father said, Miserable insect. If I had other children, you would never have gone to the throne. The emperor knelt before his father. What is the Golden Empire? The insignificants like you becoming an emperor. Because of you, a fool. I pray and pray that your spouse, the bride of the crown prince, occupies the throne. He looked down at his son and spoke. So that all your affairs are under her control. The elder continued, so that not a single decision was made by your desire. Understood? The man switched to a scream, showing his authority. I ask you understand me. A useless idiot. You were just lucky to become an emperor, a worm. And no matter how much the emperor tried to escape from this chopping vision, it did not let him go. The man ran forward, his face was shed later, and his breath was straying. What is I missing? What is wrong? Then, in front of his eyes, the image of the Empress rose, who stood detached in the middle of the hall for receptions. The next second, the girl turned and looked at him with a piercing look. Your Majesty! The man stared at her with complete bewilderment in his gaze. The boundaries of reality and this vision were erased. He began to actively gesticulate and scream, like insane. You are already dead! But Rosalyn from his vision seemed to not listen to him at all. All the atrocities committed against me. Around the girl appeared a swarm of red butterflies. She continued, You will be presented to you in the same extent. At some point, the butterflies began to attack a man who was completely defenseless. He had to scream. The unemotional figure of the Empress froze before his eyes, as if a ghost from the past. In the next instant, the eyelids of the Emperor twitched. He seemed to be about to wake up. The man opened his eyes and raised himself on the bed, piercingly shouting. Natasha lay next to him. The girl took him by the shoulder. Did you dream of a nightmare? The man answered. Empress! The man began to wave his hands, as if he had been crazy. His gaze was glass. She survived. She is alive. It's just alive. Natasha looked at him as if he really was a little out of himself, while the man continued. Then the girl decided to do something. She hugged the Emperor. My poor Emperor. She is already dead. But the man pushed Natasha and shouted, I need to make sure of this. This woman is definitely alive. The poor girl fell quite painfully. I have to verify this myself. She continues to torment me. The Emperor's mistress tried to shout something in the trail, showing her anxiety, but the man quickly left. As soon as his figure disappeared behind the door, Natasha looked at him with genuine contempt. She took up her head, still sitting on the carpet, because a few moments ago she was thrown out of the bed. Here, the farther the more you're heating up, the Emperor. I thought everything would work out as soon as the Empress disappears. But then her gaze softened a little when Natasha said quietly, Okay, everything is fine. She took her hands on her stomach and said, Once this place will belong to you, baby. Rather, give birth to your brainless dad from here, and Mom will prepare everything you need for this. Meanwhile, at the other end of the mainland, someone watched the sun rises above the water surface. Rosalyn looked towards water, and her face easily illuminated the just-appeared orange rays. Two people were sitting at the table on the veranda. The table and Rosalyn, who was still on the run. At some point, the man's voice destroyed the silence hanging between them. I invented. The girl turned her head. He smiled maliciously and said a little later, I came up with a new name to you. Rosalyn stared at him with misunderstanding. She did not think that she would have to go to such extreme measures. New name? The men's red eyes expressed some kind of storm of emotions, which was not very clear to the girl. The next moment, the table extended his hand and accurately tucked her hair behind her ear. He leaned closer to Rosalyn and said, Arin Rosia. This name was reduced as Asha. The girl asked a completely understandable question. What does it mean? But the man grinned and answered, I will not say. Then she stared at him with dumb questions. But he translated the topic. It is hot and it is driving in sleep. You need to take a bit a little. The next moment, the man held out her hand, as if hinting that he wanted her to go with him. But the girl did not understand this gesture and asked, What am I? The table immediately explained what he meant. His voice sounded warm. Let's go together. He dragged the girl behind him. But I don't want to sleep, he said. Well, then just lie down and rest, and I will sleep. Droplets of sweat appeared on the face of Rosalyn from how absurd the situation seemed. The table was about to open the door in front of him, but the girl began to speak. Honestly, she continued, trying to move a little further, I want to see a little more at sea. The man with some indescribable sadness looked at her and said, I would have said right away. The next moment, their hands unclenched, and he released Rosalyn to return to its former place. The girl bowed her head down, as if thinking about something very much. Recently, thoughts have not given her rest, but after a few moments, she was in the arms of the table, completely not understanding why he so sharply grabbed her in his arms. She did not know what she should do in this case. Why did you raise me? The man continued to go. So go faster. Where else to go? Let go. Tamon Krasis. The man answered thoughtfully. It sounds good. You can continue. She was ashamed of the position in which she was. The girl hissed, I hate you! One day you will scream about your love for me. As I think, the heart is already freezing. The girl answered, How can you be so arrogant? The cabin stepped on the red carpet, which led all the floors at his estate. He said, They came. The Empress looked up in bewilderment to examine the room in which she was now. Where? But the next moment, she saw that the window from this room was leaving the sea right. It was a large window for the entire wall. The view from here was no worse than the veranda. To some extent, perhaps even better. She could watch how the waves crashed against the rocks, and the spray of water scattered in the air. At that moment, something in the soul of Rosalyn froze. She looked like a child who had just seen magic. The table lowered her onto the bed and raised her a blanket to cover the girl. She was still not comfortable because this man was always next to her and there was no salvation from him. But at the same time in this situation, she no longer objected so much. Look at the sea here. The man lay down nearby and hugged the girl from behind. And I will sleep hugging you. The waves continued to crash against the cliff with frantic force. The spectacle was really bewitching. The lamp slowly swayed from side to side, as if hypnotizing with its movements. Rosalyn turned to see what the person does behind her. So sleeping so calmly. She remembered how he told her, Why should deaths be a reason for yours? Remembering this, she turned her head and stared somewhere in front of her, completely immersed in memories. Scraps of his phrases still lived in her memoirs. The way this person assured her that the problem was not in her. The girl clearly remembered everything. This is not your fault. Brighter, happier than everyone. Live! Then she turned her head towards the table and looked at him. Because of him. The girl extended her hand to him, still completely in her memoirs, and not understanding that she was now moving. She carefully laid her hand on the cheek of Tamon, afraid to wake him. The expression of her face seemed a little concerned, and in some kind even evil. Because of him, my thoughts about death disappear. The girl opened her eyes in the middle of the night. She woke up due to the fact that the man, lying next to her, coughing. His cough was so strong that it seemed as if he was about to die. The cabin no longer hugged the former empress. Now he twisted in pain and coughing. The girl called him by name, but it seemed that the man had no strength to answer her. He rolled over on his back and put his hand to his chest, as if trying to do something with his lungs. That something hurts with you? The girl was sitting above him and did not know what I was worth doing now. Never previously she clashes with this. His body is too hot. At the same time, the poor fellow still continued to die from already terrible pain. When the girl realized that his cough did not stop, she thought that something needed to be done. In the darkness of the night, nothing was visible, and there was no time and effort to turn on the lamp. Rosalyn, I arrived in bewilderment, screamed the name of the man, and trying to reach him from time to time. "What is it to you?" At some point, the pain of a man became so unbearable that he ran to the wall and fell near it. The Empress screamed, "Stop! You can die at table!" But the man did not want to leave his position near the wall. He extended his hand forward and said, "No stand." His fingers left a scratch on the wall. "Stop! Stay in place." After that, the man's body pierced another wave of indescribable pain. He clenched his teeth stronger. He began to beat his hand along the wall and repeat the curses. It was not at all like an ordinary table. Rosalyn thought at that time. He constantly grabs the chest. Is it really that disease? In each generation, childbirth is dying one person, suffering from blood disease. I heard gossip, but did not think that it was serious. At this very moment, the Empress realized how powerless she was in the face of such a danger. What to do? The man rested his forehead against the wall and thought, "You cannot lose mind. Otherwise, I will violate this promise to her." The book says, "If you share life force with a person on the verge of death, there may be danger." The cabin understood everything. Obviously, now life energy will cause a negative reaction. "Recently, I have not flooded the strength." Then he looked back. Where the girl was. Once. Only once. "It seems that you can spill more." She took him by the shoulders, not even thinking that it could bring him discomfort. "You need to call the servants." But the man sharply turned the dialect as soon as he heard about the servants. It seemed that his condition had normalized. Rosalyn asked him, "Is this all because of your strength?" She continued, "If you can't call others, then the fact that you have the strength of the secret?" It seemed to the Empress that she understood everything, but at the same time, she looked perplexedly and sadly at the man in front of her eyes. She asked, "Maybe I can help something." And this was her main mistake. The men's pupils narrowed. The table turned his head to the girl and asked, "Do you really want?" She said, "I never give up my words." It seemed that she also realized that this help meant something strange, but it was too late to retreat. After that, the man, whose face was flowing a stream of sweat, clenched his teeth and extended his hand to the girl. He held out his hand to her face and gently touched her cheek with his fingers, pulling closer to him. He still hesitated, because he did not want to violate the promise he had given, but in the end, he broke. Then, the man's burning breath walked along the lips of Rosalyn, and she realized what she signed for. "Do not complain later." After that, the Tamon kissed the Empress. She seemed to try to interrupt the kiss, but she stopped. That's how the night went down to the camp. At night, the sea view looked even more fascinating. The next morning, the wind drove. Now the waves did not rage so much, and the sun shone brightly above the horizon. The girl held out her hand and pushed the table from herself to the distance from which he could not reach her. But this did not stop the man. He leaned over and continued to strew with Rosalyn's neck with kisses. "Let me sleep a little," the Empress thought. "Yes, I said that I want to help. But who knew that he was such a hot man?" But then she looked at this man's face in front of her and thought, "But now it seems to him better." Therefore, the girl closed her eyes and added mentally, "What a relief." The next moment, he got up on the bed, straightening the blanket on the girl. The table turned to her with her new name, Aaron Rosius. It was quite unusual for her. "When I saw you in the distance, I felt cold. But approaching, I realized that I was greedy." Then he lay back on the bed and hugged the girl, pulling her to him. "Charming woman." The sun shone through a huge window with a sea view. "Any RA will replace it like this, with you in an embrace." But the next moment, the idyll was destroyed by sudden cries. "Your Majesty!" The red-haired girl stood in front of the entrance to the chambers of the table. "Do not make noise. I will not look at the fact that the valet of the local—" Her hands were folded in her chest, and her face looked as if she was very annoyed. "There are no borders." After a few minutes of a one-sided scandal, the door to the bedroom of the tablespoon with a creak opened. Judging by how the expression on Her Majesty's face changed, the table finally deigned to leave the room. "Finally we met. The Minister of Foreign Affairs." The man was still sleepy. "What kind of business in the morning too earlier?" The girl indicatively expressed confusion. "Morning? Is it morning now? Since when is this morning 3 in the afternoon?" The manner scratched the back of the head and asked, Already so much time has passed? I felt bad, so I did not pay attention to time. Her Majesty smiled. Clearly, let's talk inside. But the cabin said, in my bedroom? Let's better in the living room. She clearly did not like such an offer. Let the Empress block. This threatens to cut off the head. The man still did not understand the purpose of her visit. So why did you come here? In any case, I was going to the palace today. The girl smiled. I woke up at 3 in the afternoon. Would I go to the palace at night? Are you going to visit me at all? But, despite the persuasion of a woman, the table slammed the door to his bedroom and said, I will not let it go. The Empress sharpened her gaze. Your refusal hurts my heart. But what are you hiding there? This is suspicious, and really believe the man hid. But not something, but someone. Not like a toy for entertainment. What did you bring from Thanatos? The girl was smart enough. You did not come to me with a report after arrival. In this room is there that you brought? At that moment, the man decided to somehow get out, but did not embellish. Inside, only an unhappy trembling woman without clothes. But the Empress needed more information. This is not an explanation. If the woman there, you already ran out of there. If she is inside, let him meet me now and will make us a company. The man respectfully bowed his head. I am very grateful to you for the offer, but I have to refuse. The Empress knew him too well. No matter how you look, you are too nervous. Then she burst into the room, opening the door with a knock and walking confidently. Go away! At this very moment, the cabin realized that his days on this planet seemed to be numbered. He did not know how the Empress would react to this, and the girl continued to decisively go forward. And what kind of girl is this, since you are so diligently hiding her? The ruler of Amora quickly burst into the bedroom of the table. And what the hell is this woman? She hastily ripped off the red bedspread from Rosalia and continued the phrase. Since you are so diligently hiding her. Her amber eyes widened when she completely removed the blanket from the bed. The ruler was silent for a second. In front of her was the former Empress in one robe, who was lowered from his shoulders. She was illuminated by daytime sun rays. A disheveled look gave attractiveness. The red-haired girl was surprised, looking at the lady. Wow, wow! And really, a woman. The black-haired man, standing behind the ruler, took up his head and covered his eyes. For some time they stood in silence, listening to the distant noise of sea waves. The man spoke the first. I turned to the Lord. You crossed the line, she said slowly. Wait for dazzling silver hair and the eyes of the color of the amethyst. It seems I have already heard about it many times. The ruler continued. This is the same girl that you brought with you from Thanatos? There, he looked a little nervously and anxiously at both girls, and droplets of sweat flowed from his face. The man spoke. I don't know where you heard this. No one saw that I brought from Thanatos. She did not leave me for a second. How did they know? This thing, or a person, Your Majesty? Whoever it is, you must hold him accountable for the provision of false information. The ruler crossed her hands on her chest and skeptically examined the bed with the girl. Well, if you insist so. But first answer the question. What did you bring from Thanatos? Then the man hesitated a little before the answer, and then slowly said, the skin of a deer with silver horns. Both girls at the same time turned around and looked at him. The ruler led. What? The man repeated again. The skin of a deer with silver horns. The lady clarified. This is true. Finally, I will receive armor, which confront all poisons. I already gave up because these deer almost died out. You had to bring her. Why did you hide? The man said. Why do you think I will give it? And you are smart. The smile from the ruler's face literally disappeared immediately when she looked at the girl. No, wait. The red-haired and the table was looking back at Rosalyn sitting on the bed. Then who is she? Then, thinking for a while, the black-haired began to tell. This is a woman, which I brought from Nixet's, paying a special price. The girl began to tighten the dressing gown above. Have you bought a woman? Are you asexual? The man answered. No, I have needs. She came out expensive, and now she pays in full for it. The woman asked. You, never interested in women? The cabin approached Rosalyn and took her by the chin. There are several reasons, but the most important. Then he turned to the red-haired girl and answered. She is very similar to someone. I begin to understand. I did not see her personally, but there is an external resemblance to the Empress Thanatos. The ruler sighed and asked, Okay, where are you from? Rosalyn was embarrassed. The girl suddenly pulled a black-haired man by the sleeve, intending to say something to him. Rosalyn grabbed a man by the hand with the sleeve and said, Who is she? If it's your wife, will you drive me away? The table answered, She is the queen of this country. You have nothing to be afraid of, my silver fox. He added, And yes, know that I do not have a wife. Empress Teo spoke. So is she a slave from surgery? The answer followed. Despite her appearance is a Hiroshenka, but it does not speak our language so well. Theo continued. Well, how did Hiroshenka become a slave and have come right? Well, what's your name? The fair-haired answered. Sorry, I don't know your language well. If you repeat the question again. The red-haired empress repeated again. I asked what your name is. Rosalyn hesitated a little. The young lady began to speak resolutely and confidently. My name is. But after these words, he stumbled a bit. She said almost in syllables. Aaron Rosia. The dark-haired man was in shock, looking at her. My name is Aaron Rosia, the man thought. She knows that, using this name, he becomes the sea itself. The man continued to look at the fair-haired girl in surprise, not expecting such words from her. It, in an ancient, already almost forgotten language, means the most beautiful sea. The newly made Aaron Rosia lay on the bed, a blank blanket, and looking at the sea. She thought, I'm tired. Handing her head in hand, the girl thought about something peering at the horizon. She recalled the meeting of the Tamon, the Empress, and her herself, and thought, Is this man asexual? Rather, he is a lustful pervert, a monster. How did he still live, if not at all interested in women? Aaron Rosia rolled over on her back and pulled a blanket above. What does this have to do with me? She continued to think. Yesterday he looked bad, and I was forced to help him. The girl was lying with lowered eyelids and thought, Since he saved my life, I had to pay for it. Aaron Rosia opened her eyes. By the way, then they both talked about a deer with silver horns, about deer, which are difficult to breed because of their aggressive and sensitive nature. To breed these creatures, the previous emperor sent children to live in a herd. The fair-haired continued. After that, the surviving children live with them and tame them. Such children are called Lagerlessa. There are only 2 survivors at the moment, brother and sister, Mira and Rushendia. Aaron Rosia lay and looked at the wall in front of her, thinking anxiously again. She sat quietly. She remembered their words. We will only follow the words of the Empress. Your Majesty, have mercy on us. Please ask you, pity on the deer that you hunt indiscriminately, and protect us from the Emperor. Empress Rosalyn looked at 2 children and bowed her head in front of them. She answered. Fine. 2 guys looked at her from the bottom up with tearful eyes. The ruler added, I promise. She folded her hands in front of her and then complimented. I will protect you as long as I am alive. Aaron Rosia sat on the bed, clutching her hands into the castle, trying to drive away memories. I have to do something with them. The black-faced man suddenly spoke sharply and looked at the girl. What is my silver fox thinking about? Then he continued. Since I didn't even notice how someone entered? The man looked radiantly and gently at her. The man crossed his arms over his chest. What I thought about, since I didn't even notice how someone entered. He sat next to him. I was worried that I would drive you out. I do not want me to be treated as a slave. The cabin smiled and looked at her with red eyes. How? So you don't like the status of a slave? The man pulled a little. Then. After that, Aaron Rosia scrolled all possible further words in her head. The young man lay down to the girl on his knees and took the chin. How about my beloved? He bowed his head to her leg and said, A fairly quick increase in level, right? Aaron Rosia removed the man's hand from her face, and after a pause, spoke. I spoke yesterday, but I repeat. Then she said, I hate you. And the ranger a little further, moving in the opposite direction. What happened at night, hatred? It was passionate. Can you make love with a hated person like that? The dark-haired continued his speech. For example, I am not. Aaron Rosia turned on her side and looked at the sea. The girl looked dreamily into the distance, putting her hand under her head. What do you want from me at all? He seriously answered. It seems that I answered the last time. Was it not enough? The young lady recalled the words of the opponent, the words that he wants her experience, mind, body, and heart. A pause hung in the air. The girl lay again and pondered the words of a man and her memories. She turned sharply to the other side and stood up, leaning on her elbows. You say you want me? Black-haired answered her. Wow, you haven't forgotten. The girl furtively looked at him and asked, What are you up to? The man calmly began to explain to her. Please trust me, I'm not going to draw you into this game. He suddenly leaned right over the girl, put his hand on the pillow near her face. But know only one thing. Then the master ran a thumb along her chin. You are already in my hands. Different, repulse, but the young man hung over the fair-haired, continuing with a grin. You can never get rid of me. Time. But in the same balcony, they arranged a meal, sitting opposite each other. The sea was raging, and its waves fought against the house of the table, creating excellent splashing sounds. Rosia fluently examined the table, and everything that was on it was, and then a man. But at first she was silent. After that, after a few minutes, she deigned to ask, What happened yesterday will happen again. The man listened to her question with her eyes closed, carefully chewing food and pondering the answer. The girl was illuminated by the sun's rays falling on her face and hair. He answered, Maybe, she asked. Cause? The table was in no hurry to answer and preferred to enjoy a delicious soup, pulling a spoon to his mouth. The girl spoke. The strange ability you possess? The man answered slowly. Certainly. Strength got out of control due to the fact that you saved my life with its help? He answered. You are half right. The fair-haired woman was indignant. And where was I mistaken? He said. The reason why power got out of control. The cabin put his hand to his chest from the side where the heart is. I poured her into an unstable partner. Is this not a divine force? For the first time I hear about this method. The girl spoke, looking at him. The cabin calmly answered, gesturing. Well, each ability is unique in its own way. Then he folded his hands into the castle. I did not know that such conditions were needed until I became the owner of the gift. Rosia thought for a moment. And this, by chance, is the wrong disease transmitted from generation to generation in your family? I like your quick wits, the lady continued. If you seal power, this will not happen again? Maybe. I don't know, because so far I have not treated anyone like that. But now I can find out. I am sure of this, the man continued. If it does not come out to seal strength, perhaps I will not live for a long time. She looked at him and spoke. Better to hurry, do not you think? He turned away. This is not so easy. As you have already noticed, my vitality is mainly transmitted through fluids in the body or proximity. Such things are done when a strong connection with the partner. The girl answered, Your power is so impudent as you. The man closed his eyes and grinned easily, hearing such words from Rosian. Suddenly, the cabin clasped his hand over the girl's hand, who lay on a white tablecloth. The girl asked awkwardly, What you? And the man, sipping her hand to him, said, Look. The black-haired put her snow-white hand to his cheek. I am so hot and healthy, but they sat against the backdrop of the setting sun. Because of strength, I must carefully build relationships, she thought. Just like saved my life. So contacting someone, he conveys part of the strength to the partner. Having moved his hand, he said, If I sleep with anyone, they find out about the gift, he may get out of control. Although the fusion of bodies does not mean if I am not abilities. But, if I don't say, she will not understand. I can't sleep with everyone. Last night we stopped the disease. For some time, everything will be in order. A man with black hair and red eyes looked down, thinking silently. Rosia pressed her hands to her chest, clasping the second hand, for which he took the table. He lowered his eyelids and said, How interesting. You hate me to such an extent that you would like to kill. The cabin continued. But the expression on your face, as if you feel wine for saving you arbitrarily. The girl turned away from the man, saying, This is wrong. He answered, Do not worry, Rosalyn, Rosia. I do not want to see your frowning face. And the black-haired crossed his arms over his chest. This is not your fault, she screamed. Yes, that's it. All this is your whim. I did not ask you to save me. The captive captured her answered her. True, but then what about the face? The fair-haired was annoyed. Despite your fundamental, you feel responsible for the fact that power has become out of control. He leaned his head on his fist and gently looked at the girl sitting in front of him. Let me capture it in you, Oren Rosia. She listened to the interlocutor and did not say anything. At that time, the boy heard a voice. We are sailing right now. If everything is loaded, then we are going. He slowly opened his eyes. He was locked behind metal rods, but between them the sky was visible. The young man neatly climbed and knelt down, leaning on the floor. What? Is this a cell? He immediately ran to metal rods and began to try to open the door to get out of there. But when the boy came up, he saw a sea blue under cover of night. He was nervous. Still relying on these rods, he looked into the distance and thought anxiously, See? I'm not a ship. His eyes widened when his head suddenly visited even more alarming thoughts. Really? Trade of people? At the same time, somewhere in a remote place, someone asked to immediately release him because the abduction is illegal. Two men looked at him with obvious contempt in his eyes. This Salem is so noisy, the boy protested. How dare you? Live me out. I belong to the Imperial Academy. The next moment, something was thrown into his cage. Something spherical. Then, thick gray smoke began to come from this subject, because of which breathing was difficult. The guy closed his nose and mouth with the sleeve of his clothes, but this decision was clearly not long-term. He fell to his knees only about what it was at all, and why it was so difficult for him to breathe. In the end, he spread on the floor. I have to get out of here, but I can't make sound. This awareness overtook him as a thunder among the clear sky. But then his gaze squinted. The boy looked at the bracelet that was wearing his hand. Is it glow? This was the last thing he managed to see before the poor fellow lost consciousness. The next morning at the Tamon estate was lively. And I have to allow you to do this? Then my ability stabilizes. We will become partners, and you will own the same force as me. The overthrown empress hastened to answer, I don't need it. Hearing such an answer, the man said, Will I save you from pain and wounds, or do you want another? But the woman was unshakable. She sat opposite him with a cold expression on her face. I don't need anything. The table looked at her as if she had missed some very important chance of something good. Then he offered something else. How about forever a devoted beast? She answered. Looks like you look more like a monster. He added, I swear I will never betray you. But the empress answered, No, if necessary, you will betray. The cabin objected again. Do not stick me into your standards. Did you think so about all the people who swore allegiance? The girl did not understand. We drove. You could believe them, but not to me. I know, to trust someone like me. N wiped his mouth with a napkin and said, You'll change your mind at any time, if possible. I would like to get an answer before the force gets out of control. The girl drooped. Then she realized her eyes to look at the distant figure of her companion. Two got up from the table and headed for the room. On the street, it began to cold, and the waves rose even more. And imperceptibly on the estate sank a veil of the night. Lights light up in the rooms. Two maids sat near the bed of Rosalyn. More than a month has passed since the Lord Asha came to the mansion. The green-eyed maid said, In fact, after your appearance, we were inspired and began to write a novel. Asha did not understand a little how she could be connected with the novel, and therefore asked, Novel? A passionate melodrama about a beauty with silver hair that was captured, and about the red-eyed general of the desert country Cayman. When the girls talked about the plot of their novel, their eyes shone, and their hands were actively gestured. Asha sat on the bed in bewilderment and thought how she should react to this. The obsessed general did not leave the princess alone for a minute, and in the end, she fell in love with him. We have already written about half, and I really like the printing house. If you think so, how was it a country? Thanatos? Their empress also has silver hair and purple eyes. But of course Our Lady is much more beautiful. This phrase made Asha smile. She said, Thank you, and the truth sounds very interesting. Later, when do you finish? Show me. Another maid entered the room. I think it will be better if you do not see him. The girl shared her opinion. They said that it was a passionate melodrama, but in fact it is not clear how much everything is vulgar there. The green-eyed girl raised her finger up and said, "The love scene cannot be missed in the relationship of a man and a woman." The girl in a blue dress picked up. "Right! You gave birth to 3 children, don't you even know that?" The maid was so outraged that she dropped out of her hands a sleep linen. "Ah, you! What does this have to do with children?" 2 novice writers sang in chorus. "Azrael, you are so blushing. What did you think about, since the face has become like that?" Azrael asked them to stop. From this situation, an even wider smile broke out on Ashi's face. The night descended to the mansion. The moon shone so brightly that it seemed as if the second sun had risen in the sky. Ashu hugged the men of the puddle on the same bed by the panoramic window. The girl could not fall asleep. "Unlike Thanatos, it is peaceful here. Can I really do nothing?" A few days later, 2 girls invited her to go outside. "A walk is a good idea. You are sitting here all the time." The girl was bewildered and thought, "Soldiers everywhere. Didn't they follow me?" When the door to the girls' chambers opened, she and her maids headed out into the street. In the corridor, they were immediately met by several soldiers. It seemed strange to Asha. When the girl went down the stairs, the girls held her hands. "Madam Asha, be careful." The girl did not understand such care. "Everything is in order. I'm just limping a little. The staircase can be dangerous. I'm just worried. Are all those soldiers my bodyguards? If so, then twice as many as when I was an empress." The girl turned around at the soldier. "It would be better to stay in the room." Everything protested. "Why? Even the wagon is already ready." Asha asked. "Wagon? Do you mean the carriage in which aristocrats drive?" Then she bowed her head and thought. "They all know me like a slave in his bed, but a carriage. Among the servants there are rumors." And then the table himself appeared in front of her at all. So she knew it was necessary to stay in the room. When the man asked, "Wasn't you going for a walk?" the girl answered another language, too many accompanying. The cabin heard that the girl spoke to him in another language and quickly realized that this was in order not to offend the servant. After that, he answered, "There are only 10 of them. What is the problem?" The girl was at a loss. She decided to operate with facts from a past life. Even in Tinitos, there were fewer. "Although now I am not an empress." Hearing this, man extended his hand and said, "Right. You are Aranrosian from Amor, my beautiful slave in bed." The girl did not like it. "I think I need to look for a way to die again. It is better than living a slave for carnal pleasures. I found out how the word acts on me and threatened me. Therefore, the low in origin should persuade the head." Rosalyn clenched her teeth, not knowing what she should tell him. She completely disabled this situation. After that, she walked around the table. Kotoiri remained standing still, but the man did not hesitate to grab her hand, not letting him go away. The girl tried to break free. She said loudly in the same other language, "Let go!" But the man was not going to let her go. On the contrary, he came a little closer and said, "I will stop joking, so do not be angry." He squeezed Ashi's hand stronger and said, "It really hurts me if you leave." The girl heard what this man wanted to say, but she was still not comfortable. She tried to free her hand again. "I realized already. Maybe let my hand go?" The cabin remembered something that seemed important to him. "Is it still hard for you to ride in a wagon?" The girl answered, "Yes." Having received such an answer, he looked at her with his piercing gaze of red eyes and came up with something. The next moment he proposed, "Then let's go with a fluff from the sea next to the mansion." Rosalyn was delighted. "See!" When these two reached the seashore, still day. The sun shone brightly above the horizon, and the waves rolled softly. The girl looked fascinated at the water surface. "Well, how?" "Huge, huh? I want to look at it all day." It seemed that she finally felt alive, and even a small, almost unnecessary smile appeared on her lips. The next moment, the girl's eyes sank, and she again acquired her detached expression on her face. Asha, as she had now called her, looked at the Minister of Foreign Affairs that he stood in front of her and wanted to tell him something. Her question sounded like a thunder among a clear sky. "Not too appropriate. Did you want to capture your strength in me?" The man was shocked by such a sharp change in the topic. Fear was reflected in his eyes. It seemed that he was read as an open book. Asha continued to speak. "I, who had once destroyed to die, differ from the one that I am ready to live. Since you saved me, you have to take responsibility for it. I hope this is enough for this." Something in these words seemed to a man so familiar. He stated, "Now you look a little like your former." The girl continued to speak. "Well, be your way, but in return you will fulfill my promise." The table immediately caught the mood with which she said this. "It looks like a deal." The Empress understood that there was no point in getting away from the answer. "This is it. Do you conclude a deal with me, Krasis?" After that, the table extended his hand towards the girl and said, "It's nice to hear this, so everyone should get something." He also added, "And in return, I will fulfill your 3 desires." Such conditions seemed to the girl not very honest. "Too little. Come on, 5. After listening to the girl, the table thoughts with a smile. "Not demand more, Aaron Rosius." And then he agreed. And after his consent, the girl uttered the last condition. "And do not fall in love." After these words, the smile came off the man's face. This condition seemed to him too cruel. The Empress turned away with her arms. "I know that you want me, but it is better to limit me with this." The gaze of the table was darkened. He knew that she did not crave love, but why did everything turn inside me? But instead of expressing his true feelings, he decided to quarrel. "I thought I would love you? How brazenly!" While the man thought that it would somehow help him, the girl smiled and answered, "If not, then everything is fine." Then the core decided to feel the soil. "And if I refuse this condition?" She answered, "We assume that there was no transaction." When he realized that he was driven into a neatly placed trap, it was already too late to do something. "But you can't order the heart. What to do if I accidentally fall in love with you? Then you yourself interrupt our connection." Coordinated by Tamon. The owner of the gift of God is not so easy to do this. With the help of a scroll that is in a large temple, it is quite possible. Made by borrowing the power of God, he is endowed with a property. The girl scratched the back of the head. "I have one, so we use it. You have nothing with you." He squeezed his hands into his fists. "If I ask the temple in Garcia, I can get it. It is stored there under a different name." Then the man finally decided that he could not continue, took a step forward. "Okay, but if you fall in love with me?" Tamon put the patient with his left hand to the girl's lips and ran. She immediately hastened to answer, and the man's face changed. "This will not happen. But if it happens," the Empress continued, "then do what you want. If you want to keep the connection, save. If you want to interrupt, interrupt." After these words, the expression of the man's face finally returned to normal, and he again began to smile. The Empress decided not to rush and somehow reinforce the deal. "Then let's fix the deal on paper." But the table in time entered its monologue. "Wait! We listened only to your requirements. You need to add mine." Rosalyn expected anything, but could about what she had to listen now. "Well, forward." But to her surprise, the man began from afar, or was going to voice not what she was thinking about. He looked down and said, "Your right leg." The girl retreated sharply. The Empress was used to understand everything at once without unnecessary words, and therefore she asked without waiting for an explanation. "What?" She looked at her right leg, which now more or felt better, and felt better than before. Then she looked at the man in front of her and asked, "You want?" Her eyes became a little gloomy, and the atmosphere around was fled. "So that I cut my leg?" From such a bold assumption, even a confident menkeeper was completely perplexed. A smile froze on his lips, as if the girl had just said something too absurd. "For that matter, it is better that she remains with you," Asha said. "What are you going to do with my foot?" But this man, it turns out, did not joke about his leg. "I don't even know, well, anything. Just say that you will give it." The Empress thought, "Just a leg." It was all better than being helpless. Therefore, to reinforce the track, she was even ready to put her leg in the end. As soon as her consent was uttered, the man began to move in her direction. The girl did not know what to think. She exhaled, and a drop of sweat appeared on her face. This was a sign of anxiety, but the table crouched and raised the girl's leg, forcing her to bend the limb at the knee. "Fine, then now." Then he approached the girl's leg and said, "Fine, then now this leg." Then he kissed the bandages. The former Empress did not understand what he was doing and why. She thought, "Undoubtedly. This man is definitely a pervert." Around the same time, in the palace of Thanatos, it was as always dark, gloomy, and cold. The emperor coughed as if he was about to die. He called Johann, rising on the bed. "This medicine does not help. Bring something else." "Your Majesty, the doctor said that any other medicines will only aggravate everything." He continued to scream. "My heart seemed to explode, and you tell me to endure? Do you want me to die right now?" "You! Are you definitely not the rest of the Empress?" the butler asked. "What are you talking about?" Then he tried to justify himself. "Johann, who has been next to you from 10. How I can deceive His Majesty." But the Emperor seemed to be completely crazy. It was painful to look at him. "This is the curse of the Empress." "Damn woman. Go immediately and tell me to set fire to the Sanset family mansion, so that in its place only the ashes remains." Then the Emperor gave an even more strange order. "Dig the coffin of the former duke and throw it into the fire." The butler tried to object, but the Emperor did not want to listen. "If you do not do it, I will cut your throat." Therefore, he had no other choice but to obey. The Emperor continued to sit on the bed of coughing. This man was so desperate that he began to speak with himself. "Yes, let's see who will win. You or me, Empress?" Aaron Rosia, along with a man, sat at the set table, about to eat in the fresh air. The table spoke. "The queen is incredulous, and she has a good instinct. But it is normal. Then we somehow covered with the skin of a deer with silver horns, but still restless at heart." "Why?" A black-haired man with a slightly worried expression on his face chatted a fork, thinking what to say. "Recently, there are many curious eyes around," the girl said. "You have a good relationship with the queen. So what are these spies?" The man answered. "I told the queen's good intuition, and she trusts her." He raised. "It is highly likely that Tioranch felt something was amiss that day, but she could not continue to interrogate us in view of the lack of evidence, so she put spies." Aaron Rosia thought, putting the fork to her lips and lowering her gaze on the table. The fair-haired laid the fork on the table, with a ringing, slowly removing her hand from her. A ham in his hand looked at her and asked, "Why don't you eat any more?" The girl answered, "I ate," the black-haired said with a smile, waving a ham. "This is not enough to hold out." Aaron Rosia frowned her face, displeased, but asked with interest, "Hold out? What are you talking about?" She sweated a little, holding a white napkin in her hands. Words flashed through her head. "Seal." The table smiled good-naturedly and looked at the girl sitting in front of him. "Exactly what you thought about." She stumbled her head with her hand, saying, "Is there any other way?" The man answered, "Who knows?" She involuntarily squeezed the snow-white tablecloth with her hand and thought. I again led to his sweet face. The dark-haired smiled maliciously and asked, "What is the problem?" Aaron Rosion answered, "Nothing." After which the table answered, "Is it true?" "I thought so." The servant brought them a new dish and put them on the table. The servant told, "This is an oster sharpish, a seafood that is difficult to find." The color of the hairy girl quickly glanced at them and asked, "Ouster? The so-called oyster, right?" Then the table answered, "Looks like you have never tried them, I advise. Quite an interesting taste." The lady with interest stole one of the oysters on the fork and carefully examined it. Then the pink-eyed ate her. The man said, "Judging by the expression, you liked it." The man smiled and said, "This dish has a meaning. Interesting?" The girl looked questioningly. He continued to smile and carefully look at his interlocutor's reaction. The groans of the bride. "This dish is usually eaten on the first wedding night. They say if you eat." He hesitated a little. Then he continued, "Then in bed the bride will scream nonstop. We can check if this is true today." Aaron Rosia rose, leaning her hands on the table, and shouted, "Tamon!" He laughed. The effect began to act. The girl squeezed a white tablecloth in her hands, listening to a man. "How so?" "Until the night, it's still so far." The former empress got up from the chair and went towards the table. The dark-haired one trampled. She came close to him and looked angrily, and he, as if nothing had happened, was sitting with a smile on his face. After that, Aaron Rosion suddenly specially stepped on the leg of the dark-haired with rage. He grabbed his leg with a smile and said until the lady was annoyed, "Are you already kicking?" What a wild mistress! Aaron Rosia began to be in earnest, to be angry with the man. Please shut up at least for a minute, he said. Okay, do not be angry. Late at night, Lanaso raced on his horse as quickly as possible and ended up in the mansion. Entering, he was met by a guard. Mister, what brought you at night? The redhead answered. Where is the cabin? We must convey something, the guard said. Just went to the bathroom. He was indignant. At such a time? I'll wait. Say that I came. The red-haired people sat on the sofa, spread his legs, drinking tea. He languidly sighed from the road done. Suddenly, a young man laughed out loud. Red hair fell directly on his forehead. Where is he? Dresses up for his wedding night or what? The table answered. What is an urgent business since late? The blue-eyed turned around, sitting on the couch, and looked at him. Finally, I thought you drowned and died. He got up and went to the man. Have you accepted the aromatic bath? He also hated it when something smelled of water. The manner of calm on his face scratched his head. People are changing, so what's the matter? The queen put spies to your house. When I came, I saw people that they were hiding inside. What's happened? Black-haired put his hands and calmly answered. I got caught. Lanaso did not understand anything. What? The cabin said. The queen invaded my house and then entered the bedroom. The redhead asked, and what's next? The black-haired admitted to the interlocutor. Composed on the go. He said that he brought a slave similar to that woman. The red-haired man looked in surprise at his comrade, and he asked anxiously, did she believe? The table answered. If so, there would not be so many spies around. Red nodded. And that is true. He continued. What will you do? If the queen finds out who this woman is, he will not leave everything just like that. The dark-haired said, putting the cup on the table. And what about that? Do you think she can take it from me? Lanaso closed his eyes and began to get something from under his clothes. Well, yes, you yourself can handle it, okay? Then he handed a small old scroll, tied with a flimsy rope, a man. Take a look at it. The scroll that I found at the auction yesterday. I counted it interesting. The table picked it up and began to read it. This is life. Seal before the 6th moon. Save the child in the sea. If you can't, the treasure is lost. Life and death. It looks like a prediction of divine power. In addition, this is the Hirushi language. It turns out that someone knew about our plans before? The man looked at the sheet. Who else did you show this? Only you. I tied with auctions, but I went to buy a gift for my younger brother's birthday and found it. The black-haired man thought, propping his head with his hand. He turned to Lonaso. Hold everything secret. Aaron Rosia lay in a large bath in pink water with rose petals, enjoying in the evening. She took her head and thought, breathing steam from hot water. This is just a capture. Still, she got up from the bath and began to go to 2 twins that they were waiting. The deal, and nothing more. In the black kimono, she stood in front of 2 twins, exposing a little shoulders. She thought, but then she completely threw kimono on herself, covering her shoulders, and thought again. Why am I so nervous? The girl in a red dress stood in front of a massive door. The light fell, illuminating her figure. Aaron Rosia tilted her head and froze. She exhaled quietly and stood a little at the door. A light smile touched her lips. She closed her eyes, but did not take a step back, and mentally configured. The girl's hand reached for the door handle. The sound of the mechanism violated the silence around. She opened the door. A fair-haired man entered the room. She froze on the threshold and examined the dark room. A huge bed with red curtains stood by the window. The woman thought, he hasn't come yet. She crouched on the edge of the bed and, putting her hands on her knees, thought, what should I do? Her gaze became softer. A light smile touched her lips, but there was a glimpse of anxiety in her eyes. She recalled how she was sitting on the bed, waiting for the emperor who entered the door drunk. He came, wiping his lips from drinking alcohol, and annoyed looked at the empress. She sat on a snow-white bed, put her knees in her hands, and spoke. Are you definitely not a corpse? Empress Rosalyn sat, lowering her eyes to the floor. How will I sleep with those who have whiter than snow? The emperor faded from such a statement and looked even more angrily at the woman. Then he instantly broke a bottle of wine. These eyes of so many men brought to madness. Disgusting. The unceremonious emperor continued to tell the empress, "Violet is the color of the dead." He poked his finger at her, increases the tone of his voice. "Don't look at me. You are dead. No feelings, no joy, right?" The girl, sitting on the bed, abstracted from everything, and listened to her voice. "You don't even answer because you died." She came to her senses from the surging memories, and remembered that she was sitting alone in the room. She lowered her head a little upset. "Yes, such an appeal. I'm already used to it." Suddenly, a black-haired one entered the room. "Because of your splendor, I don't even know where to put myself." He was heading straight to Aaron Rosia, who was nervous and sat on the bed. The steps flashed echo. He came close to the girl in the dress and stood on one knee right in front of her, looking into her purple eyes. The cabin told her, smiling, "Aaron Rosia, you are for me as a gift that I have been waiting for a very, very long time." These words were a little amazed at her, and she sat with dilated eyes, not knowing what to answer the man. The man sat on the bed and began the conversation. "You probably don't know that from the moment I picked up you." The girl looked away and embarrassed, pondering the words of the black-haired. Her cheeks blushed a little. Aaron Rosia closed her eyes. A drop of sweat walked along the box. She mentally tuned herself. "Yes," she thought. "You can't be taught to his face." And she said, "As you can say so shameful things so casually." The man looked at her with his red eyes and answered, "So this is my whole charm." After these words, the fair-haired brushes turned red again. She sat next to the man. She was embarrassed. The core held in his hands a kitchen and a glass, stretching it to his companion. She looked at him. He proposed an initiative with a smile for his face. "Let's drink a glass?" To relieve stress, the girl agreed and took a glass of alcohol. They clicked, for an impeccable, perfect deal. The man and girl were sitting on the edge of the bed. They held the glasses in their hands, and after a toast drank. After she took a sip, she pushed the glass from her lips. "What is it called?" "Hapkinju," the lady said. "This is a drink for the newlyweds." He answered, "They drink it before they spend the night together." He smiled again, looking at Aaron Rosi sitting near him, and he said, "Or is it not?" The girl was nervous and lowered her gaze, thinking over his words. And she said, "True, but now? Is this some kind of romantic moment? My heart will explode now, so I thought it was romantic." The man continued to speak. "Only I feel this? You know, this is a little offensive and sad." The lady said, "If the heart explodes, I will believe." The table answered, "How can such cruel words can say?" She asked, "Stop behaving frivolously. You say as a man who does not know shame." The young man looked at her, keeping silent a little. "Shame. Do not look for what I don't have." The girl looked in front of her. Her face reflected restraint and irritation because of the table. Then the girl began to drink a drink from her glass, throwing it away. The man was surprised. She grabbed a kitchen man out of her hands and began to pour even more into her glass. He said, "Okay, enough." He took the kitchen. "I will stop teasing you. Calm down. Do not drink anymore." The girl looked in surprise. "Why?" The man began to speak. "Well, you know." The dark-haired man approached the girl and stroked her cheek. The cabin began to squeeze her strands of hair and persistently sort it out, stroking a little and looking at the lady. The black-haired looked at Aaron with extreme tenderness, imagining what was waiting for them. With his hand, he accidentally dropped a glass from which a red, unwritten liquid was poured. Then he said, "You can't relax too much." At the moment, he turned out to be a rowing over the girl. The girl looked at the man from the bottom up and talked. "Who? Who is this more nervous here?" The black-haired whispered softly. "I'm nervous." The man leaned closer. His eyes burned with impudence. He squeezed the girl's snow-white hand. "I was too nervous, and now barely relaxed." He leaned closer, almost touching the girl's face. Their views met, creating tension. "That's why." The couple merged in a single kiss. Passion raged between them, and they were in anticipation. "Let's start?" The magnificent palace shone against the backdrop of the blue sky. The empress asked a question. "How?" The red-haired woman crossed her hands and asked, "All this time he never left home?" "So for sure." Her gaze became thoughtful. after which she exhaled. Whatever the palace, to be there for a long time. The Teo looked thoughtfully at her reflection in the window. She thought, Tamon, what do you think about? The Empress remembered his words at the moment when she burst into his mansion. This woman who I brought from Nikrus, paying a special price. Teo thought, I thought it was an empress. The red-haired girl squinted. Her gaze became sharp. She thought, the cabin is not the one who will lie to me, but... The Empress thought again and squinted her eyes. Nikros. The slave is from there. The red-haired man was anxiously digging in her thoughts. Be that as it may, she bothers me. The house stood in the middle of the water. The ocean raged again, despite the obvious weather. The light of the sun made its way through the window. The rays were in truth too bright. 2 people lay covered with a red blanket. The Rosalyn leg was still bandaged, Asha, as she was now called, and the table was sleeping peacefully under the sun's rays. After some time, the girl began to open her eyes a little. She climbed onto the bed, holding the blanket, and looked out the window. Already morning. Then she looked towards the table lying next to her. The man's face expressed serenity and relaxation. The girl held her gaze longer. After that, she looked to the side, as if forgetting about the man that he was next to her. Meanwhile, morning in her native empire did not look so calm. Snow was already walking that day. The girl was sitting by the bed of the emperor, who was not good at all. You have a fever. This girl was Natasha. She did not look upset at all. Even in the temple they said that they were powerless. Then Natasha touched the forehead of the emperor and said, For all the will of God. Her hands were cold. At some point, the emperor felt something was wrong and grabbed Natasha's hand, pushing her away from him. The girl looked at him with excitement in her eyes and asked, Your Majesty? But the emperor did not answer, only coughing. The girl continued, carefully speaking, My heart is already bursting. In the morning, you have lost consciousness. 12 hours have passed since that moment. He said, Then all this time you were next to me. But his speech was interrupted by a terrible attack of coughing. The girl rose and expressed anxiety. My lord, my deity, how could I leave you? Do not worry about anything and rest, the man said. I will definitely make you an empress. Then Natasha answered, I am nearby not because of the desire to become a ruler. I just always want to be next to His Majesty. As soon as she said these words, Geloti looked at her with hope in her eyes. The girl continued, Therefore trust only to me. Rest and don't worry, my lord. After that, the emperor repeated again, I will definitely make you an empress. When their hands opened, he added, Just wait a bit. And Natasha answered, Rather, recover. The man fell into sleep. Apparently, one of the drugs that he took on him affected him. Natasha first looked at him with a smile on her face. But this continued until she was convinced that Geloti was sleeping. Then her face changed dramatically. The smile disappeared, and indifference came to replace. The girl took out a white handkerchief from her pocket and gently wiped her fingers. She looked down and thought, I entered the room about 5 minutes ago, and if I had not had time, Natasha realized that she was worried about something. But what to do if the truth rushes? The only desire of the girl seemed difficult. Leave until the child is born, Your Majesty. Then the girl looked away and thought, By the way, his strength? She remembered a man lying in bed. Who knew that his power would be so insignificant? Natasha stood in the corridor and thought, How many he killed, since he continues to get sick for so long. Then she moved forward along the corridor. A miserable sight. Natasha continued to think about the emperor's imminent death and how she would conquer the throne. In the end, she came to where the portrait of Geloti hung. Emperor, you turned out to be a man with the most insignificant power in history. You really disappointed Natasha. Meanwhile, where Asha is now alive, the sun has already risen. This contrasted sharply with the weather in Thanatos. Anarosia and Tamon sat at a table in some cafe and spoke. More precisely, Tamon wanted to talk, and Asha unpacks the letter received. Based on the read, something had to be saved. Life definitely indicates a table, and death, probably, to Geloti. Then the Iron Child mentioned here, Arson, who now has a metal relic. Asha looked up at the table and said, I have to find an Iron Child. The man looked at her in surprise in his gaze and asked, You want to say that you know who it is? The girl, completely confident in her abilities, said, I left him a relic. Hearing this, Tamon brought his hand to his face and thought, this means. He paused in his speech and then continued, perhaps someone knows about this situation. Therefore, we must hurry. Before he crosses the sea, you need to return the relic. This child is called Arsène. At my request, he is now going to the Louvre. Judging by the written, he was seized there. The girl said the next words not so joyful. I don't know where this ship is floating. The table took the letter from Asha and reread it again, propping his face with his hand. At first, if he sat on a ship heading to the livery, he already left Tanatos. There are 3 nearest countries where you can get on the ship. But the man thought about weighing every word. It's hard to get to Amer across the sea. Mach is the country's farthest from Livre. Therefore, the probability that he went there is very small. If so, then only Nikrus remains, in which the slave trade is very actively engaged. The former empress did not know what to do. She thought for a few seconds, and then the girl turned to the table. Can you save him? The man smiled without making a sound. The girl did not understand why he reacted so. With a smile on his face, he said, month. In a month later, I will bring this child to you. Meanwhile, in the imperial palace of Amor, it was quite quiet and not so vividly. The red-haired ruler stood near the large window and looked at the city. Her eyes looked empty. It seemed that the girl thought about something deeply. After the defeat in the war, my father had to kneel before the previous emperor Thanatos in front of the people and me. The ruler of Thanatos forced everyone to look at how the king of Amara kisses him on his feet. Thus, 12,000 inhabitants of my country were able to escape. But the Thanatos troops took the younger sister of the empress in exchange for the union. After the sisters were separated, no one knew what happened to the second. Thanks to the humiliating agreement concluded that day, Amor was promised 100 years of the world. The girl hit the glass with anger. She was not the one who liked the day of sorrow. My sister Lana. Soon there will be a chance to find her, necessarily. That empress died with her family. There was no one left but a stupid emperor. And judging by the stupidity of this man, the death of Thanatos was only a matter of time. However, it was something that Empress Amor did not like. Each time, the girl tried not to think about it. The sighted slave, similar to the late empress, continues to bother me. This girl did not get out of the ruler's head, she said quietly, so will not go. Then she gave the order, continue to watch the mansion. If that woman goes beyond the limits of the house, bring it to me, Empress Amora also added. By any means, even if this is required to kidnap it. At this time, Natasha wandered around the dark palace of the emperor. The girl's stomach in all this time has become quite large. She hoped that the heir would be born faster than the emperor died. The girl brought her eyebrows to the nose and thought, I don't know when the emperor will die, but the next thought was, just in case, you should think about emigration to another country. They said that Amor is well suited for life. If the rumors are true, then this is definitely a country for people like me. Natasha also remembered the man whom she often saw on banquets. Was that man a minister? The figure of a stately man immediately appeared in her head. Tamon Krasis, and unfortunately, or happiness, it was the only one who never looked in her direction. After that, the girl tilted her head and thought, from that moment on, I must slowly start seducing it. Having reached the desired door, Natasha carefully tapped her fingers. The door opened sharply, and a man appeared from it. He very quickly ran out into the corridor and hugged Natasha, rejoicing that she had come. Sorry for being late. His Majesty woke up and did not let me go. A red man with anger sprinkled the emperor with curses. Natasha asked him to be quieter. The next instant, 2 entered the room from which the man just appeared, and the door closed. The girl touched the surface of the table, pressing rocks into him. After that, the girl told him sarcastically, caution, Roxanne. Still, there was no need to forget that they were still in the imperial palace. I, Roxanne Bake, do the country's affairs after the emperor fell ill. Who dares to do anything to me? Hearing this, Natasha thought, how arrogant. But she said, of course, Mr. Prime Minister is minister. The girl looked down at him and thought, Gilly and I could not have children, so I just used you. Then she pointed to her stomach and began to speak. Our child. She leaned closer to the Prime Minister and asked, You will help him become an emperor? The man was so stupid that he said with a smile, There will be no problems with this. The girl looked at the prime minister as the last fool, but was delighted. Everything went straight as Natasha planned from the very beginning. The girl smiled and looked at the man whose child wore under her heart. At the same time, in Amor it was still quite light, even despite the rain. The table looked at the zipper that she sparkled brightly somewhere in the distance. That day, too, there was such a thunderstorm weather. Hearing a beautiful song. He recalled the events of those times when he was in Thanatos. Not noticing it myself, I ended up on the terrace. He looked around the corner of the building and looked directly at the Empress, who stood there and hummed something. After the man understood who was in front of him, he did not think to go back. Although his facial expression has become noticeably darker, the eyes of the table were faded again. He thought, God, what am I doing now? And the girl asked the maid to bring her a glass. Then, the minister climbed the memories of the recent meeting. He remembered well how the girl erased him at the meeting with her prohibitions. But His Majesty Emperor Tanitos has already signed an agreement. He handed over to Amr the rights to develop minerals. According to the end of the Thanatos, the emperor cannot alone dispose of the property of the imperial house. I do not approve of the deal. Your contract has no power. And if you try again without me to solve things at the meeting, the girl looked at everyone with contempt and said, I will miss all future meetings with Amor. The minister stood around the corner and thought. A woman who was so hard in her decision. The girl slowly drank the drink from the glass. Who knew that she could have such a sweet voice? In the next moment, the Empress looked up at the snowflakes that flew. Do you know what, Charlotte? In the full moon, when heavy snow comes, they say that the soul descends between snowflakes. Just today is my grandfather's birthday. Maybe this is his spirit in a hurry to us? The Empress looked at the falling snowflakes with a spellbound gaze. I thought that she was a woman full of anger, but her expression on her face now speaks the opposite. The next moment, the man leaned his head against the cold wall. I'm sure. Now at every meeting, a man caught himself thinking, I became strange after that day. It seemed to him that something in his heart then came out from the limits of normal. The feelings that I experience. This happened every time he looked at the Empress. Then he thought that this was not a simple interest. But now this girl was in his country, in his house, next to him. Standing in cold rain, the man squinted his eyes and thought, I want to hug her. But since this is not a situation in which my vitality is needed, I can't convince our right Empress. In this case, a man found another plan. He took out a knife. Then, his gaze darkened and sank into a cold, sparkling blade. Thanks to one sharp movement, the blood of the poor poured into the asphalt. After a few moments, he had already brought him to the chambers of the girl, who peacefully read the book. Asha saw a table, who limped and covered his hand with his other hand on the threshold. Tamon? The man looked too sorry. But what you just do not go for the sake of explaining. The girl ran to him, asking on the go, What about your hand? The cabin looked away to the side of that. His lie was more difficult to recognize. A sudden attack of a mercenary. Then the man added, I lost too much blood. The head is spinning. He stood on one knee and took the girl by the hand. Cure me, Aranrosia. The Empress came into misunderstanding from his words. That is, he came to her to just heal, but she had no time to think about it now. She looked at the expression on the face of the table and could not refuse him. The man grabbed her hand with his bloodied hand, which also trembled. And how to refuse this? The girl leaned over and asked, Is there a wound somewhere else? The man did not answer her question, and therefore she simply said, I will cure you. Take my hand. At this moment, the man felt smart, because Asha did not know that he himself had caused his wound. And yet, at such moments, he thought, Is it so bad to live as crazy? The girl was sitting on a rock opposite the sea. A beautiful house loomed behind her. She was silent, bask under the sea breeze and rays of not hot sun, dreaming of something. The red-haired closed her eyes, plunging into painful, but very warm memories. Rosalyn spoke. In order to not happen, go into a safe place immediately. I prepared the house. Anna looked with bitterness and tears in her eyes, screamed the Empress. Your Highness, don't say that! She tried to get together with her thoughts and calm down, trying to say, How? How am I to you? She bowed in a slight bow to the Empress Rosalyn and said, How can I leave? Leaving you, Rosie. Anna left. A man was in front of her, blocking the door, and said, Where are you going to enter? I received the news that the Empress was overthrown. After that, you became a threat to our family. Anna looked at this man and did not understand anything. Tears rolled over her eyes. She said, Expensive. I don't want to see you. Get out. But first, leave all the property that the Count's wife received. The red-haired girl enjoyed the view of the beautiful sky. The wind fluttered her hair. She spoke with tenderness. Rosie, this is the coast of Noem, where we wanted to come with you. The girl was sitting alone on the rock, looking at the surface of the blue sea. But in the end, I am now alone. She recalled how she stood there with a guy. Then there was also this place. He said, Anna. Kane. A fair-haired young man, looking into Anna's amber eyes, said, In truth I am. He hesitated a little and took his eyes out, worried. I was chosen as a messenger, Richelm. The girl was surprised and stared at him with big eyes. She was enveloped in fear. This is the order of His Majesty. The delegation of Rosalyn is known for not knowing when they return. That's why. The man held Anna's hand. Please do not wait for me. Meet a good person and marry him. He let go of a red-haired hand. The girl wanted to utter the name of her boyfriend again, but Kane had already begun to leave without looking back. The red-haired girl, with pain, sadness, looked after the departing lover. If I hadn't let go of Kane, much would have changed. He would be trapped, and Rosie too. The red-haired girl could not stand it, and, sitting on the coast, her face flooded with streams of tears. Then she tried to cheer herself up and cheer. And what am I thinking about now? She began to rise, leaning her hands on the ground. Not a person to whom I swore allegiance. Then it tore off the green cloak in which it was. Neither lover nor family, there is nothing more. Impeccable Rosie. The great condition that you left me, I use for a place that protects. She came closer to the edge of the cliff. There is no more point in living in a world where you are not, Rosalyn. At the back to the red-haired girl, someone was rapidly running, but she did not hear the crunch of branches. Anna, desperate, and without thinking twice, sat down on the very edge. Sitting a little like that, she gathered her thoughts. The man had already run up by a fair-haired girl who intended to take a step into the water. Anna thought to herself, Yumo! The young man began to scream, turning to her. Wait, madam, wait! He continued abruptly. Letter! A letter came. Anna thought, Letter? Really? The girl at the last moment grabbed the extreme piece of the earth, trying to stay alive. The man immediately began to pull her out, grab it tightly by the hands. Madam Anna! She lost one shoe. After that, after a few moments, the man still managed to pull it to the ground. He was in shock. What was it now? Have you been hurt anywhere? The guy tried to examine her. Anna was out of breath and answered, I'm fine. Better tell me, Leold, what kind of letter? Older answered, Second. And he began to get a folded scroll from under his clothes. Here. The man carefully handed over to his mistress the envelope with the seal. Girls from Rosary Pink Roses. She took the letter in her hand, which was intended for her, opened it, and began to read. Cries. God. The deep night is in Amor. Only some of the windows glowed with bright light, and trees swayed on the street. Aaron Rosia sat one at a large table, signing letters and thinking about something. The girl sat silently and looked out the window at the large full moon, which made her way among the clouds. The main character was a little sad, remembering her friend. I wonder if Anna recognizes my letter. As a child, I was a hunter of a carrot farm, Anna, a girl from Rosaria Roses, and brother with a prickly fence. I don't know how these wonderful nicknames appeared, but at that time, we really liked them. This is an important memory, so Anna will certainly find out. Necessarily. I thought a fair-haired one. She introduced a sharp handle to the leaf, not yet starting to write anything. First of all, I will write down my plans. Since the Sanset family has disappeared, now there are only 2 supports of the empire. This is the Marquis of Promhelio, the governor of the northwestern region. The second is the Duke of Herdium, who is also called the dog of the imperial family. Aaron Rosia sat and looked at one point. She thought over the future of the empire and continued. His devotion is almost religiosity. The former head of the clan cut off his ear as a sign that he would listen to the emperor. A fair-haired girl spoke under her breath. If I want to return the trust of the current head of the clan, then I need one person. She began to draw figures in ink on paper. Henry Arpetio. This man was a teacher of fencing, the current head of the Herdium clan, Perso. During the tyranny of Emperor Henry, he was the only survivor in the family. Later, he became a mentor for Herdium. 3 years ago, he was almost punished by the imperial house for big problems with taxes. But the Duke of Herdium paid 10 times more for him than necessary, and brazenly disobeyed the emperor. The girl thought, to lure the imperial dog to my side, I definitely need this person. He knows well that Henry is his weak place, so he carefully hides the personality of the mentor, but we also have aces in the sleeve. Anna, with luminous eyes, looked at the letter sent to her, a chain of the Sansit clan, which was transmitted as a family relic from generation to generation. The golden bowl stored in the royal family of Rumosh, and the flute of the temple of Amos. The girl thought, 3 single relics whose location is known, and all of them are where it is impossible to pick up. If I collect them together as quickly as possible. Hearts from Keaton has the gift of prophecy. I have to find him. I thought a fair-haired one. Suddenly, the young lady grabbed her body, feeling the pain, and wrinkled. What about me? As if, she thought again. As if the chest is on. Erin Rosia took a small mirror in her hands and looked at the reflection. The fair-haired suddenly was taken aback. She saw symbols under her collarbone. The name of the table appeared on the skin. She spread the fabric and skin in this place, considering with interest. Is it really a stigma from sealing? After some time, she closed her kimono that place and said, this is the so-called power. Quite cunning. Night reigned in the sea. Only one window from the set burned in the mansion of Mr. Tamon. The convocation of the Order of the Knights of the Platanos. The cabin strongly said to everyone, you need to find a child. We need to catch up with the ship of smugglers. The trade season is coming to an end, so there is little time left. He looked at everyone seriously. If not now, then it will be difficult to track down the abductors, one said. It is highly likely that the ship belongs to some slaver from Nikos. Pirates you talked about last time? Be that as it may, a reciprocal letter came earlier. It said that 2 days ago they saw a ship in the vicinity. However, as expected, we are moving forward tomorrow morning. The reason, according to the official version, is the return of the stolen relic. Someone responded from the far corner, addressing the table. Commander, so you say. What are you taking us all? I understood correctly? The man clarified. Everyone else listened attentively. The dark-haired man thought a little, scratching his head with his hand and covering his eyes. This battle is not for life, but for death. Will you be all right? A monster may appear there, or someone will be injured. Well, we'll leave tomorrow, so we need to prepare well. He got up and said, yes. Some man again called out to General Tamon. Mr. the Black-haired turned to the sound. The guard came up. The table asked. Satin, something happened? He said. Just in case, I will warn if they forgot. The guard began to speak quietly. The day is approaching when Mr. Cassian returns to the mansion. He said that he would arrive a little earlier than usual. General Caston pursed his lips and said nothing, looking at the guard. He asked with wariness, a little earlier, how much earlier? The guard squeezed his hands and said briefly, after which Satan was noticeably nervous that he was already sweating. He looked around. We'll arrive in a week. Under the cover of the night, along the Amor streets, a rider rode on a white horse and in a hood. The mansion of General Tamon. The waves are nailed to the shore, and their noise acts soothingly. Erin Rosia lay on the bed on her back, covering her eyes and thinking about something. The moonlight fell on it. The girl stood up with the pillow, hearing the knock of the door. She said, come in, and rubbed her eyes with her hand. The dark-haired man joyfully went into the room to the lady, greeting her with a gesture. The fair-haired girl got up completely from the bed. She looked something deeply worried. What happened again? Starked? The man answered her. It's a shame. Can we see if I'm not injured? The girl said nothing, thinking about her words. She turned her head a little in the other direction from the table. She looked at his hand. It seems the hand completely healed. As do not look. This is such an amazing force. The dark-haired man went to the bed and sat down on it next to the blonde. Tomorrow, I am leaving early in the morning. Aaron Rosia looked at him in surprise, after which she said, Why is it suddenly? General Changon smiled at such a question of the girl, and he asked, Why do you have such a face? He continued, Just don't say that you are worried. And we looked at him with a misunderstanding. The fair-haired turned away from the table and covered herself with a blanket, looking down. She was silent. The dark-haired one looked at the girl again, thinking about what to do on. He slowly held out his hand to her palm lying on the bed and covered her with his own. Where did he turn to her? This is an expression on the face that wants to say thank you. The girl was silent again and looked in the side. The general turned to her. Look like me like that. The fair-haired answered. What kind of facial expression? The one that makes the insides roll over. Seeing him, I want to do anything for you. The girl recoiled from the face and hands of a man and screamed, I have never done such a face. General Changon suddenly raised her in his arms with a slight movement. She was surprised. What are you doing? He smiled and carried her somewhere, saying, I will show you your face. She was nervous. No need. The black-haired brought Aaron Rosion to a huge mirror and acquired by the shoulders. He said, Here, look. After which the man turned a little to her, approaching. Well, how are you? The girl answered. What are you talking about? Beautiful? The image that cannot be compared when you were in the snow. He moved her to the mirror. The hairy girl froze for a couple of moments, considering her snow-white image in the reflection of the mirror. The cabin leaned. Why are you so beautiful for me? The girl was a little embarrassed. Please stop. Why were you born in Thanatos? Why not in Amur? Why didn't you meet me first? He hugged her tightly. The man closed his eyes, being next to his beloved girl. Then he pressed himself to her head. The black-haired took her by the shoulders and turned her to him. When I return the next time, he stroked her cheek and came closer. Smile. I never saw your smile. The table looked at her. The general stopped touching the girl's shoulders and walked a little. While I am not, try not to leave the house. The rumor about you has already spread. Who knows what can happen? He spoke very worried. And something else. A few days later, my younger brother will come. The girl looked in surprise. Younger brother? He comes for medicine, once or twice a year. But now his arrival coincides with my departure. If you accidentally meet my younger brother, just ignore him and do not pay attention. The hooves of the horses knocked muffledly on the sand, leaving behind them light dust and traces of horseshoes. The horseman sitting on his horse nervously pulled the rein and tried to stop the horse. They stood on the very edge of the desert, where, because of the high dunes, the city of Amor was visible. The dark-haired man tore off his hood and proclaimed loudly, Well, finally, I'm here! He looked encouragingly towards the city and shouted again, Amor, sending your horse! The sun's rays gently touched the surface of the water, creating a game of glare. Silence reigned around. The man was sitting in the pool, relaxing back. The water splashed quietly around. He closed his eyes, exhaling with relief. The face expressed complete calm. He looked forward and said, If you accidentally meet my younger brother, ignore him. The lady on the bed asked in surprise. Ignore? The man added. Satin will inform you. The man leaned closer and said, The fair-haired look, waiting for the continuation. The table explained, I say just in case. While I am not, do not do stupid things. She asked. Stupid things? Aaron Rosia was sitting on the bed and listening to the black-haired. Do not worry, do not disappear. Understood? The man carefully took her leg into his own hands. He quietly stroked the bandaged foot and massaged slightly. The girl looked down and heard the table again. And do not forget that the owner of this leg I am, not you. The dark-haired grinned, looking up at her, after which he said, Do not forget for anything. His eyes widened a little after he looked at the girl and talked to her. The girl sat among the white roses. Her face expressed embarrassment. The cheeks were slightly puzzled. Light rays fell on a man who was half, laying with his eyes closed, relaxing his shoulders and neck. The man lifted his leg out of the water, leaving wet traces. He thought, It's time to go out. He looked in the mirror with a towel, frowning a bit. He thought, If you look. The towel slipped slightly, opening the characters on the chest. The man was thinking. On the stigma from the ceiling. He bowed his head, examining the characters closer. The man thought, "It is not written by Rosalyn, but by Rosia." He smiled, putting his hand on his chest, where the inscription was located. Mentally said, "I like." Against the backdrop of a busy city with high towers, vanity reigned. The buildings stood in a chaotic order. The twins walked along the street. One of them joyfully said, "I'm in anticipation," she supported. "Me too." A sign with the image of the book hung in front of the store. The sun illuminated the window from the inside. Two girls with braids stopped in front of the store. They fell silent, looking at the sign. One of them, opening the door to the store, said in an apologetic tone, "I'm sorry." The man turned to those who entered. He smiled broadly and said, "The twins came." They approached the man. One of them said, "Hello, Uncle Bookman. Is our book out?" The man, with a good-natured smile, tilted his head slightly. Then he exhaled quietly, pleased with their words. Two girls shone with joy, folding their hands and faces. The first version of the print publication. Such a hot book. One raised the book, smiling. She asked, "Is this really ours?" The second added, "Exactly? Honestly, honestly, I assure you, this is the most high-quality, elegant book among all published in the capital this year." Two girls with the same braids cried out, opening their eyes widely from surprise. One of the girls in an orange dress joyfully hugged the second in blue. She exclaimed, "Tasha! Louie!" The bearded man slightly covered his mouth with his hand and thought. He said, "Finally, after 10 years, your dream came true." One of them said, "Does the uncle cry?" He turned away and answered, "You are quiet. Here are the girls. This is the first edition. The remaining will be sent today after the first check. Take your time, consider it. If you need to fix it, let me know. Shouldn't everything be perfect?" The man smiled. "I printed quite a lot. What about picking up a couple more copies with me?" The girls looked at each other. "One thing is enough for us." The second added, "Yes, we want to give it to some." "It is not by chance that you serve now?" They answered, "Yes. In truth, we were inspired by this person. This man, too, lost the whole family due to an accident." The man said anxiously, "God, this is probably why we are so worried." Nevertheless, at that time, we were together. The twins held hands. One of them said, "This person was left completely alone. Therefore, I want to do all the best for him. And you, Uncle Bookman, once reacted to us in the same way." He looked at the girls with tears in his eyes, after which they hugged warmly. "You worthy of praise! I raised my girls well." He could not restrain himself. He knew that you would become excellent writers. "I am proud," they answered. "Thank you for growing us. We are very grateful to you," the girls said. Then their uncle answered, "You are real well done." The 6th day after the departure of the table, Rosia stood on the balcony, leaning on a high hedge. She looked at the blue sea surface and thought, "I wonder if they found arson." She was restless. With the exception of the chain that is located, there are only 5 relics. One of them is a clock that can turn back the time. They say that chaos came when God destroyed them. A fair-haired girl abstracted from everything. If this is true, then we assume 2 things. First, the watch can be destroyed. The second, with their help, there is a chance to cause a deity. According to the ancient book, if you collect all the relics in one place, a special power appears. I don't know if God exists. The first thing is to collect relics. The girl was thinking. She was restlessly distracted from her anxious thoughts. But if it is not only in relics, Rosia turned a little to the side, noting that some papers were lying on the table nearby. She was surprised. She began to read sheets. Emperor Thanatos lost consciousness due to the curse of the Empress. She read everything written with misunderstanding and irritation, squeezing the sheets more strongly in her hand. Then she was furious and with neglect threw them on the floor. She said quietly, "She didn't even start curse." Rosia left the paper alone and then went to the exit from the balcony. Opening the doors, she entered. After she went, the maid turned to her, speaking lively, "Madam Asha!" "As you asked, the letter sent anonymously delivered as soon as possible." She bowed. Holding the bag in her hand, she carefully handed it to her mistress. And yet, this is the remaining amount. Erin Rosia held up her hands and maids who intended to give her a bag. The fair, haired gentle, and carefully pushed the hands of a black maid from herself. A white-haired woman handed over a bag of a maid. She looked in surprise and answered, "What?" But, Madame Asha, a woman with a serious look, put a bag in her palm. She said, "This is the price of your hard work and fidelity." The maid with excitement took a bag. The girl added, "Therefore, I want you to accept the money." The maid swept through the head of the maid. Such a large amount, like this person in general. She was confused. The dark-skinned bowed easily, and covering her eyes, she softly said, "Good, but however." She leaned this bag against her chest. "I will spend them on what you wish, Madame Asha. Please trust me with important assignment in the future." Erin Rosia gently looked at her. Someone rushed along the corridors of a large mansion, creating an artificial draft. This someone shouted, "Madame Asha!" Both women standing nearby turned a little towards the scream. Two twins quickly burst into the room, to the ladies with a book in his hand. Finally, our book was published. They quickly ran to Erin Rosian. The girl did not have time to come to her senses, asked, "Book?" "The love novel we talked about. They wanted to show you first, since you inspired us to write it." They brought their book closer to her. The fair-haired looked at her and examined the cover. Considering, the girl drew attention to the name of the book. Name: The Scarlet Passion of the Desert. Erin Rosia awkwardly accepted the book as a gift, after which, looking at the girls, she said, "Thank you, read at my leisure." The eyes of two twins burst with happiness. They were incredibly happy, and shouted, "Hooray!" Shiny silver hair seductively scattered. Captain came and grabbed this woman by the hand. "How dared to escape from me?" The expression on the man's face seemed sad and unhappy. Unlike Tone's, the girl was lying and screaming. "And I never obey. I will always, again and again, will run away from you." She read. And at that moment, his tongue penetrated the tightly compressed lips of Riella, and Erin Rosia, reading the book, was excitedly led by gaze along the lines. It intrigued it. She closed the book with one movement of her hand and bowed over it. What did I just read? Then she put her hand to the left side of her chest. And I thought, why the heart is so pounding. The princess of a foreign country brings to the desert as a captive, because the captain fell in love with it. Due to the egoism of the protagonist, she runs away, but he grabs her hands, spilling bloody tears. Erin Rosia sat thoughtfully and reflected on what she read. If I were, could you forgive this man? I did not think that I would be so sad after reading a love novel. But on the other hand, it is in philosophical. After her thoughts, two twins knocked. Erin Rosia, without turning to the sound, answered, "Come in." They entered with smiles into the room of the lady with a tray. "We brought you a slight afternoon snack. Drink mushroom soup." After that, one of them noticed that their lady, Erin Rosia, laid their book in front of her on the table. The two of them quickly ran up to her, leaning against the table itself. "Have you already read our book?" It was a short story, so I quickly managed. She was embarrassed and looked away. Very. The eyes sparkled with happiness, and they waited until their fair-haired mistress continued. Very. "Very interesting," Erin Rosia said with embarrassment, trying to hide real emotions from what he read. "In fact, we were also a little confused. This is the first work. It seems the first on the list. Bookstore Street. Where is it?" the lady asked with interest. "In Thanatos, literacy is low. Madame Asha, you haven't gone anywhere yet, right? They say that the next month the flower festival will be held." They continued. "Last year it was celebrated around this time." The lady looked at them. She looked softly at the girls and answered, "Yes, it would be great to go there, but..." The girl hesitated. The lady translated the topic. "How could you write such a book? The content is very..." The twins were frightened. "Very what?" The white-haired one flushed a little, starting to eat soup, and continued. "Vulgar." The girls were surprised. "God, this cannot even be considered vulgar, Mrs. Asha. Are you reading such a novel for the first time? We will later bring a bunch of such works. By the way, when did you read the book Did Not Notice the Annoying?" The girls continued. "It will be published in 300 copies. You need to be careful." The lady thought about it. A fair-haired woman said with a smile and enthusiasm, Thank you. Then is it possible to slightly change one scene? The girls were a little nervous, they said with interest. Scene? Yes, say. The twins leaned over the table and the book with their mistress. Where? Here, like this. In any case, this scene bothered a little, but it is very cool. Yes, we will certainly change it. Someone from the outside shouted loudly, Off from here! 3 girls looked around where the sound came from. They approached the hedge of the balcony. One of the twins asked, Why is it so noisy outside? What is there? The older maid came to them and turned to the lady. Madam Asha, I did everything as you said. 3 turned to her and looked with an incomprehensible look. Azrael, what's going on the street? The woman was a little nervous, looking away. After all, she did not know how Mrs. Asha reacted. There, Mr. Cashin. The male figure stood in the doorway in front of the guards. He screamed, Why can't I use the eastern wing? They answered him, It is closed for a while. There was a small fire inside. Cassian looked incredulously at 3 guards and asked, Is it true? I wonder in what place it is. Outside there is not even soot. Where did she go? He looked in bewilderment. No, I will still use only the 3rd floor. If you look, it looks normal. The blonde guard closed his eyes, reflecting on what Mr. Tamon's brother said. He contributed. The guard opened his eyes and began to look at the Cashin. He went to the side, keeping eye contact. The leg in sandals with patterns gently stepped onto a light stone floor. A light rustle sounded. The heavy spears crossed in front of a man blocked the passage. The air was filled with voltage. A man with dark hair frowned, looking around, with sarcasm, and asked maliciously, What is the matter? We finished cleaning outside, but still a mess inside. Since you have bronchial asthma, it may affect. I do not feel any smell, do not lie. As the order of Mr. Tamon says, no one can go there. The dark-haired man looked at the guards for several minutes, thinking, Damn, I wanted to live there, especially because of the magnificent view from the main room on the 3rd floor. He went to the balcony. Please go to the western wing. I planted your favorite flowers. It looks no less beautiful. Allegedly, due to the fire, the entrance was blocked, and soldiers were assigned here. Yes, and the personal soldiers of the brother. This mansion belongs not only to the local, but also to me. His eyes flashed with rage. He screamed. Further, Cashin said, switching to increased tones, Listen to your master. The guard bowed. After that, the fair-haired began to get something from under his clothes. He was in a hurry. He took out an envelope from there. Just in case, the letter that Mr. Tamon left for you. The dark-haired man looked incredulously at the envelope that the guard handed him. Cassian inaccurately pulled out this letter from the hands of a man, pulling closer to himself and revealing. He completely opened a sheet of paper in front of him, which rustled in his hands, and began to read. The man squeezed a letter in his hands. My brother could not do this to me, right? The man turned and confidently walked somewhere. I will not go there. I will not. I will go to the western wing. The girl stood on the balcony and looked at the removing figure of a man. She held on to the railing and thought. The younger brother of the table. Someone poured tea into a white cup. The drink slowly was poured. Asha asked, How old is the brother of Tamon? He recently turned 20? The maid said. In fact, Mr. Cassian is a good person. After that, Asha looked at the talking girl with a question in her eyes. He was weak since birth, to such an extent that all foreign doctors said that they would not live up to 10 years. Our family has long served the Krasis family, so I know about it. After Mr. Cashin almost died several times due to poor health, the lady was looking for a fortune teller, not doctors. One of them decomposed on the carpet and looked at the ball. Separate him from your brother. Therefore, the mistress left for the province, taking her youngest son with her. Surprisingly, Mr. Cassian recovered, and now the owner of the estate is Mr. Tamon. He was unusual since childhood, an outstanding boy who studied at the Metropolitan School of the Royal Palace, and then he became the main master here. Asha raised a cup and drank a hot drink. That's how. Perhaps that is why the master is so gleamed to his brother. He does almost everything that the young master wishes. He thinks that because of him, his younger brother was forced to live in the province. If the master finds out what I told you about this, my head will fly from the shoulders. The maid also added, But I think he still will not kill me. He still needs me. Asha smiled hearing these words. and the maid began to laugh. The brother of the table, meanwhile, stood on some building, looking at the estate. The man examined the territory and thought, why did the brother close the entrance to the eastern wing? Even 3 days later, no workers are visible, not to mention construction. Not to let anyone in. What is the reason? The man thought about it. I'm too curious, I can't stand it. Then a light smile appeared on his face. His eyes played with a crazy spin. My brother will not unscrew my head for this? A ship with white sails sailed over the waves. It seemed that the storm began. The table was on board and thought, probably Cassian has already arrived in the mansion. Then his thoughts switched. Although Satin and Azrael are good in his own business, he is unrestrained by nature. One of the sailors laid out a telescope and shouted loudly, This is smoke! All those present swore to themselves. This is their leader, so suddenly? Tamon took a step forward and took out his sword from the scabbard. He said to everyone, Left is on you. Then the man became in the combat rack and lowered his voice, saying, And I will figure it out with the right. Heeding the interests of the sailors in the battle, the man said loudly, Take onions and spear. Let's kill their leader. At the same time, something interesting also happened in Amor. There was no storm on the horizon. The rain was still poured from a bucket, and the brother of Timona sailed along the sea, trying to find the way into the closed wing. A few minutes later, the man almost swam to the building, which raised so many questions in him. Asha, the former Empress Thanatos, stood on the terrace and looked at the sea, not noticing anything strange. A few seconds later, a strange figure in the sea still caught her eye. What? The girl did not know what to do. He thought, has he come across the sea? As soon as the man was on the shore, he wiped his eyes from the water and looked forward. As soon as he raised his eyes, he saw the girl near the railing, which looked at him from top to bottom. The whole gamut of emotions was reflected on his face. He screamed, Woman! He continued to scream. The fact that my brother was hiding was a woman. The brother of Tamon went in a fit of laughter. Asha looked at him, reducing her eyebrows to the nose. Then he was finally able to stop laughing with the stupidity of his brother. The next moment, the man asked the girl, What is your name? But before he had time to wait for an answer, several members of the servants appeared from somewhere from a distance. They quickly grabbed the younger brother of the table and dragged him in the opposite direction from the girl. He was reluctant to go and cursed. Hey, what are you? Do not know how to speak? Or did my brother ordered me to ignore me? But he did not leave his attempts to find out the name of Asha. Woman, I ask your name! Then the girl turned and left the terrace. She did not respond to the exclamations of a man. Asha thought, Noisy. And the brother of Tamon did not leave attempts to reach her. Hey there, name! But the guards pulled him further and further from the woman with whom he wanted to talk so much. At night, in the wing where Asha lived, there was also some strange noise. The curtains in the room were slightly ajar, and knocking sounds were made from the window. Asha, who tried to sleep, turned over on the bed, trying to not pay attention to sounds. She understood that there, outside the window, was the brother of the table. He hoped that he would no longer bother me. At some point, she even thought about the fact that she should get up and shout at him. Because of this shameless, the girl could not fall asleep in the middle of the night, and therefore already invented a plan of reprisal. But at the same time, she was also worried about the brother of Tamon, in the sense that he could get sick. Because of this, the girl did not close the eye for a few more minutes, and when the sounds did not stop, she decided to get out of bed. Seeing that the girl had finally got out of bed, the brother of the table was delighted and stopped knocking so intensively. They stood opposite each other. They were shared only by glass on this window. Asha looked at the miserable and thought what to do for her to get away from here as soon as possible. The man looked at her, a girl that she was not going to leave or let him in, and asked a dumb question. After that, Asha looked down and figured out how to reduce her audibility. In the next moment, she already held the fabric from the curtain in her hand and twitched the window. The man, seeing how Asha pulls the curtains in front of him, was bewildered and again began to knock on the glass with his hands. He did not expect the fact that this girl would be so stubborn. He thought, Open the window! Who was I saying? And the former empress thought at that time, I'll call Azrael. As soon as the girl was about to leave the room, she was intercepted by one of the bodyguards. Sorry, are you going somewhere? Insomnia. I wanted to go to the sea for a while. They answered her. The walk is dangerous at night. He also added, for your safety, please stay in your chambers. Okay. Ask Askril to bring me a cup of hot tea with ginger, the man said. This minute. After that, the man turned to Asha and said, wait inside. The girl remained standing near the just-closed door on the instructions of that guard. As soon as the door closed with a roar, the girl began to invent a new plan. They told me that you cannot fall asleep. Here, I brought a cup of hot tea with ginger. As soon as the maid agreed, Asha turned to her. Azrael. Then Asha pointed her finger towards the window, where for some time a man stood behind the curtains. The maid asked, is something wrong with the curtains? The girl answered, check yourself. The maid put a tray with drinks on the cabinet, and then went to the curtains. Azrael opened the curtains, and for some time could not believe her eyes. There, outside the window, there was a very familiar man. The facial expression froze. The man standing outside the window was trembling with the cold. Oh God, young master! When the young master was led inside, he warmed a little and thought, finally! But even when his thoughts were so joyful, girl, sitting in front of him still retained a cold expression on his face. The man did not know what he should start talking about, as he wanted to know everything at once. Asha stared at him without saying a word, and Azrael put her hand to her forehead in confusion. After sitting a little, the girl still got up from the whole place and was going to leave without words. She headed towards a closet and also returned back. While the girl walked around the room, the young master was surprised, looking at her leg. The girl's leg was still bandaged after an injury. This surprised the man. Asha held in her hands something similar to the bedspread, and it seemed rather warm. After a few moments, the girl went to the poor fellow with this warm blanket. Thank you. After the man thanked her and was wrapped in a blanket, he still wanted to ask something else. But, after a few seconds, the man asked, how did you injure an ankle? Asha chose not to answer this question. She has never spoken to him for all the time. Silence hung a man when the former empress again sank into her chair, but the younger brother of Tamon did not calm down. Hyun never held a woman next to him. Are you really his mistress? The girl spoke on Hiroshiki. Even if I am your brother's mistress, you still should not look for meetings with me. The man realized that he did not understand her, and therefore asked, I don't understand anything. Do you know the international language? Why is a person who considers me a woman of his brother hides in my chambers? But the brother of Tamona still did not understand a word. I don't understand the devil. Can you speak the international language? Then, when the man realized that he would not understand him, he said, but you. He moved a little closer to the girl. And the truth is very beautiful, the most beautiful of all I saw. He also added, and your hair color is unusual. Can I touch it once? The girl understood every word that he said, and this could not stand it anymore. She pointed a finger somewhere. What do you want? Ask to leave? And the girl continued, return, no longer come. The next moment, the man rose from his seat and looked at Asha. He did not want to interrupt their dialogue and leave so simple. My name is Tamon Krasis. The man jumped up. I did not want to cause trouble. If you have guilty of something, I'm sorry. I will not harm you. The maid did not know what she should do in this situation, and the younger Krasis continued. He came because it was very interesting. Having caught the overall atmosphere in this room, the man said. I'm leaving, so promise something. His request seemed quite funny to the girl. Tomorrow in the afternoon, let's have lunch together. Hearing this, she breathed out and thought about something detached, covering her eyelids. The girl answered all a friend, an incomprehensible young man, a tongue. Fine. Her face, for the first time in the evening, changed the expression to more friendly. Asha smiled. Tomorrow we will have lunch together in the afternoon. Still not understanding a word, but seeing the expression on the girl's face, Krasis the younger was delighted with her agreement. This made him jump out of place to lean on the table and scream, hooray, with joy. But coming to the planned dinner during the day, the man froze with a grimace of surprise on his face. The first thing he saw when he arrived in the appointed place at the appointed time was a crowd of guards, and another crowd of guards on the other side. If you count it, there were definitely more than 20 of them. In the middle of all this mess, a girl sat at the table and drank tea peacefully. As soon as the man had to start going to her, her personal maids jumped out in front of his face. They introduced themselves. "I'm Tasha. I am Louis." In the end, this turned out to be completely not what he planned. There was both Azrael and the butler, and almost the whole guard. The brother of the Tamon turned to the butler. "You seem to have overdo it. I just wanted to have lunch together." There was no other choice. Who will invade the chambers of the woman of his brother at night? Let nothing happen. But this is a very wild and perverted act. Therefore, from today, I decided to strengthen the guard 3 times. The younger brother of the table was very surprised. "To protect some slave from me, did you put 30 guards to her?" But the butler chose not to answer the question asked directly. "I realize that there is a gap in protection, so I need to fix it." The next moment, the young master asked, "Satin, tell me, who is your master? When is there a brother?" "Even if there is no master in place, I obey only him. And first of all, I follow his orders." The younger brother of the table was not happy with such an answer. Subjected to the brain of bones, always the same. The brother has everything: a healthy body, the title of a hero, loyal to the family, subjects. But all this was not standing nearby with the fact that the younger had just recognized. His brother has even a woman. He could not believe that this girl was a simple slave. Therefore, today, it was not by itself. Then he snapped his fingers, and a man appeared from behind his back. "Today I brought a translator." The butler tried to object. "Mr. Cassian, the entrance to the entrance is prohibited." "Ah, how? Next time I will know." Then he went to the table at which Asha was already sitting and pushed back a chair to sit with her. He climbed into a chair in some strange and slightly impudent manner, and then said, "Maybe we'll start food?" Asha sat with her hands on her knees and looked at him as a complete fool. The man did not leave his attempts to talk with Ashi. He asked the translator to present him and ask her name. When the translator looked at the young master, he already agreed his request. The translator was pretty smart in well-played languages. He spoke in the same language in which Asha spoke earlier. The girl smiled. She has not practiced her conversational foreign language for a long time. This made her return in those days. When asked about her name, she answered something, from which the translator's face was petrified, and he was dumbfounded. The poor fellow looked at the young master, thinking how not to offend him, translating the words of the girl. And Cassian at that time sat with an expression of complete bewilderment on his face, something like a small child. In the end, the translator gathered with strength. "I asked why my name should be informed of the ill-mannered guy." These words made the young man be at a loss and lower his head. He began to speak quite quietly, not knowing that the girl understands him and moreover speaks the same language with him. Because. In the moment, his voice became more confident and louder. "Because I want to make friends with her." The 2 personal maids of Ashi almost squealed. They thought it was too good that he was trying to build a relationship with Ashi. But older people in the person of Azrael and the butler, on the contrary, thought what he was carrying for nonsense. The next moment, Cassian gave something. "I'm going to ask you from brother." "Better know my name," the man said. "Anyway, you have to be friends with me." And Asha has already come up with how to put pressure on him. She put her cutlery on the table and sharply remembered several tricks from the past. She pressed many times on people at meetings. "It seems you do not respect your brother at all as the head of the family." The translator began to translate what this girl said, trying not to delve into the text. Cassian was discouraged. Then he immediately began to make excuses. "Not true. I just take back the privileges that he stole from me." The smile on his face became a little more like crazy. "Because initially all this was mine," the girl asked. "Where did you get it?" The dialogue through the translator became more intense. "I was sick, so there is no chance there." After that, the girl asked coldly, "If you were the head of the family, you think, could you exalt the status of the genus?" Asha brought her hand to her lips, realizing that the situation is completely under her control, as in the good old. Probably not. The young man could no longer endure such pressure and split. He hissed through his teeth. And then there was a loud blow with his fists on the table. "What an impudence! You know nothing!" In the eyes of Cassian, madness and despair seemed. "I also have enough skills. Who are you? Arrogant. And your brother, unlike some, would not have crossed the sea late at night and knock on the window of someone else's woman." The butler, who stood next to the girl, did not understand what kind of feeling of fear even enveloped him. In his eyes, this girl certainly did not look like an ordinary slave. And she continued, "You would never be able to become a haze." Then she put the cup on the table with unprecedented lightness. "Looks like you said everything." Then, having finished speaking, the girl got up from the table and said, "No longer come, because I will not communicate with a guy like you who know neither the rules of decency or manner." Asha quickly began to walk towards the door, and Cassian tried to shout something to her in order to stop. But after a while, he realized that all his attempts were in vain, and the girl would not return. The wooden door slammed shut, and the girl's figure disappeared behind her. This poor man has just missed his chance. At the same time, somewhere in the middle of the sea, the ship floated, making his way through the fog and storm. The sailors tried to escape in such weather conditions. "We must sail before the fog becomes thick. Turn away!" In that compartment of the vessel, where supplies are usually stored, the boy's body rode from edge to edge to edge. After some time, such blows made him wake up and rise. What happens outside? He did not even have the strength to get to his feet. "I want to eat." In general, there is no strength. I have to find a way to escape. Then, somewhere near him, steps were heard, as if someone walked barefoot on the deck. In front of the poor fellow appeared the figure of a white-haired girl in a long gray dress. He looked at her with distrust in his eyes, trying to make sure that it did not seem to him, and this all happened for real. The next moment, the girl handed him a loaf of bread on a white handkerchief. She crouched before this iron child and handed him food. "Eat." A smile on her face for some time reassured a storm in the soul of this abducted poor man. The boy thanked her and thought, "Did you catch this child too?" He ate a bun so kindly provided to him, while a strange girl looked at him with the same smile. But as soon as he made a couple of bites, one of the sailors screamed, "Their leader!" Seeing that he was approaching them, the boy dropped the only food out of his hands with fear. He did not have enough strength to scream, so the wheezing of fear broke out of his mouth. The monster that seemed on the horizon of the sea surface was the leader of Herpes. The boy thought, "We are the end." But the expression on the girl's face has not changed in any way. The boy immediately fell to the floor and thought, "Empress, I'm sorry that you have not completed your task." The girl, who was with him all this time, dropped a smile from her face and seemed to think about something. After waiting a few seconds, she said, "Get grab," the boy asked. "What?" And the girl repeated again, firmly, "Hold on the bars." Now it had some sense, and although he understood in his head that this would not save from death in any way, there was still hope. Therefore, the boy immediately grabbed the bars of the cargo compartment, as if they could save them. Meanwhile, the sailors on the deck could not imagine how to cope with the monster of such sizes. The ship with frantic force was thrown on the raging waves, and the approach of the monster was more likely. The girl's voice sounded very calm, as if she was talking about something every day. "The ship will turn up soon." A note of confidence began to play in her eyes when she spoke. "Do not let go for anything, then you can survive." And the truth, as she said, soon the ship fell into a trap from the waves, and the sails were wet. Wet fabric dragged the entire ship behind him, and it tilted at an angle relative to water. And after a few seconds, he was completely underwater. The lattice broke off, and 2 children were still holding on to her. The boy held his breath, as he could try not to remember once again that his life is in danger. But after some time, he opened his eyes. At first, not for a long time, and then, as usual, he looked at the grate and at his own hands. It flew in his thoughts. "I'm not choked." The bracelet on the hand of this boy now glowed with a very bright light, and a few moments later, the bubbles appeared on the surface of the water, as if someone jumped there. The boy was at a loss that he did not come to life here to see someone. The same strange figure was heading right under his water. It was a man. The savior held out his hand to the boy, and he thought, "Someone came." The last thought before the boy was disconnected. Someone came to save us. Then his eyes closed. It is not entirely clear how his underwater breathing worked, but this still caused him damage. At this time, somewhere in the residence of Tamon's residence, Asha walked along the corridor with a pile of letters that instantly fell to the floor. The girl crouched in pain, as if she had just been wounded with a knife or worse. Then she sharply grabbed her shoulder. The maid ran to Not. "Madam Asha!" What happened to you? The girl tried to squeeze out a smile and said. Suddenly, the arm was ill. The maid noticed something strange. A trace of teeth appeared. Why is it suddenly? Asha immediately understood what was the reason. Is it really that something happened to the Kamanon? She tried to cheer herself up, patting and stroking on the shoulders. Please, let everything be all right with him. The body there was wounded. He dutifully endured the pain, because he knew that it was for his lady. The cabin stood right in the mouth of the monster. Grabbing his huge fangs, he pushed his mouth. The dark-haired man stepped on the tongue of the monster and tried to tame it. The young man and the girl were sitting behind. The man that the strength was squeezed by the fangs of the sea snake, straining his hand more and more. After that, at one point, the impact became too strong and the fang crumbled into pieces.